sweatshirt. Oh, that's nice. I should tell him that that door is locked down there. press the button. Just
All right, we will call to order the April 28th meeting of Committee of the Whole. First, I will move to approve the minutes of the March 24th meeting.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. And that motion passes. I don't know all members are here except Councilman Bullock, but I imagine we'll see him shortly. All right, so our one item on the agenda for tonight is legal aid, and we have a communication on the docket reminding us of all of the great partnership work that has happened with legal aid in the city of Lakewood over the last year and in the past. And tonight I'm hoping we'll get a little refresher and probably some things we didn't know about all the services legal aid offers to our residents, as well as ways that we can help refer and partner together. So thank you all for being here. Do you want to just go through and introduce your team, Kim?
So my name is Kimberly Barnett Mills. I'm the managing attorney for community engagement at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. Thank you for having us tonight.
I am Mike Russell. I'm a senior attorney also for the Community Engagement Practice Group for Legal Aid, and perhaps more importantly, I'm a Lakewood resident in Ward 3.
Hello, I'm Eric Meinhardt. I'm the Associate Director of Development and Communications at the Legal Aid Society, and I'm a Ward 4 resident in Lakewood.
Matt Vincel, manager of the Housing Practice Group at Legal Aid, Ward 2 resident.
All right.
Good representation. We just got to get Kimberly in Ward 1 and then we'll be all set.
So I did live in Lakewood when I was in law school, to be fair.
Awesome. So I know you have a presentation for us. Do you want to just kick that off?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
So we're here just to tell you a little bit about the services that Legal Aid provides and the folks that we can help. All right, want to advance me? So we always like to start with our mission statement, and it's something that we've really looked at as an organization to make sure that it reflects the values that we have and the way that we help folks. So our mission is to secure justice, equity, and access to opportunity for and with, and the for and with is key because we work with our clients who have low income through passionate legal representation and an advocacy for systemic change. And again, we work with our clients side by side, helping to empower them, but also helping them if they need us to take that next step. So we're able to provide a number of services in a number of different ways for folks in our community. Of course, we are lawyers, we're a law firm, and so we represent clients, and we do that throughout the full hearing process, administrative hearing, what have you. But we also really, again, empower folks, and we do that by assisted pro se or assisted self-represented litigation. For folks, we can help prepare documents and make sure that they understand the process so they can move through that process on their own. We offer legal advice and legal information. Both are really important to make sure that folks understand what's happening to them, what's happening in the system, and what they can do to take that next step. We advocate for systemic change, and you'll hear more about that as we go on, but we really look at that bigger solution as opposed to just helping the one individual. We engage with our communities by doing presentations like this, Know Your Rights presentations, and making sure that folks have information about what happens. We certainly can't do all of this ourselves. We are about 151 strong at Legal Aid, and we've grown exponentially since 2020. But we definitely do this in partnership with our volunteer attorneys, which we engage about 1,000 or more per year that helps us provide these services for our community. So just for clarity, Legal Aid handles civil legal issues, not criminal issues. If your liberty is at risk, you have the right to an attorney, but not in civil cases. And most often civil cases are the cases that really threaten the stability of families and households, and ultimately communities. The Legal Services Corporation in 2022 did a survey, and they realized that about 92% of folks who have civil legal issues are going unmet because they can't access legal services. That's in our community as well, but that's what Legal Aid steps in to help provide services for.
Thank you, Kim. I'm just going to go through a brief overview of the various areas of law in which we practice at Legal Aid. First, we tackle access to justice issues. So we want to remove barriers that citizens have to courthouses, to benefits, to anything where a disability, a language, or a level of income is a problem. So that's some of the cases we take on. For example, if somebody, let's say a deaf resident needed a reasonable accommodation to participate in a court hearing, we would make sure if that person is having trouble getting that accommodation in court, we'd represent them to make sure that they have access just like everyone else. We also do a lot of housing work, and Matt Vincel is our housing manager. We tackle issues related to housing conditions, like repairs or lack of repairs, tenant rights, evictions. We do a lot of eviction defense, housing discrimination, and also utilities. We want to make sure that people have access to the water and the heat and the cooling that they need. We also work with families. We provide services related to domestic violence, for instance, protective orders. We assist with some divorces, some children-related issues like custody or child support, especially when domestic violence is involved, some probate issues, and we also represent immigrants. Issues related to money. So income and benefits, think wage and hour, to ensure folks are being paid what they're entitled to from their job, they're receiving the benefits that they're entitled to. Loans and debts, we represent debtors, people who are facing collections. We have a bankruptcy practice where we represent folks in filing for bankruptcy to get a new start on their financial lives. We also have a tax practice that works with folks who have federal tax issues. Health. We have a health and opportunity practice group. There, they represent folks with Medicaid or Medicare issues. For instance, if you've applied for benefits that you're entitled to and you're denied, we can represent you in that appeal. We represent a lot of families, and this is related to housing and health and opportunity, with lead poisoning problems, where children have been diagnosed with elevated lead levels due to the housing conditions in which they live. And we also do some advanced directives. And work. Employment discrimination, wage disputes, expungements and CQEs to make sure that people who may have records have the ability to go out and get jobs. We tackle other areas to employment, and through the practice group that I work with, we also represent small business owners, entrepreneurs with low incomes who are facing a wide variety of business-related issues that could be contract issues to litigation. Group representation. So I've been working with legal aid programs most of my 17-year career as a lawyer. I started in Alaska. I moved to Texas and worked for a legal aid program on the border there for many years, and I came to Cleveland in 2015. I've been with the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland in 2017. A number of years ago, I was able to join this practice group and really do the kind of law that I dreamed of doing in law school, which is representing groups, doing community lawyering, where I'm working with residents, neighbors, who are trying to solve problems in their neighborhood. That could involve litigation. It could involve building power where there is a lack of power. It could involve a wide variety of issues, transactional issues, and that's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy. So in our community engagement practice group, where we have our group representation practice, we work with informal associations, block clubs, neighborhood groups, tenant associations, tenant unions, and we're doing more and more of that now to make sure that tenants who want to organize can organize, and when they're organized, they have the wherewithal and the documents necessary to make a difference in their building to improve their living conditions. We work with nonprofits on formation issues, on contractual issues, governance issues, and like I said, we work with small businesses as well. So a wide variety of groups, official and unofficial, and it's the kind of work that gets us out into the community. We practice democracy in how we represent our clients, and the goal of this practice group, I mean, it's inherent in all the work we do, but I think most explicitly in how we practice is to build power among clients that may have a lack of it, so that when we leave the scene, they're able to practice self-determination in a way that they couldn't before we assisted them. question.
So we do advocacy in a number of different ways. Of course, we advocate individually for our clients by going to court and helping empower them. But we do that by really promoting community organizers to help folks like Mike was talking about feel that they can move issues forward on their own with group power. We utilize the media in a number of different ways to ensure that folks know what's happening in the community and the changes that are happening. So for example, the driver's license law changes. We make sure that we use media in all forms that best reach our population of folks so they know what's happening. We work with allied organizations. So we have a partnership, for example, with the food bank to make sure that folks know about the food bank, but that their folks, if they are experiencing civil legal issues, that they come to us and we can try to help. We make sure that public officials are held accountable. So for example, with the lead situation, we wanted to make sure that the laws that were already on the books are being followed and enforced. We, again, make sure that courts are hearing individuals who come there, and that's making sure they can access the court, but also can be heard meaningfully if they choose to represent themselves. And we also look to administrative agencies and try to streamline processes for low-income clients to make sure that they can get the services that they desire. And then our service area. So legal aid covers this top swath of Northeast Ohio, Lake Geauga, Ashtabula, Cuyahoga, and Lorain counties. And we represent folks who are at 200% or less of the poverty level. And that's about $64,300 per year for a family of 4. So it's a really low number. And we make sure that anyone who might be on public benefits, they usually would qualify for our services, but there are folks that are working poor who would also qualify. Most of our clients do work. They simply don't make enough money to be able to afford an attorney. And for folks who need to apply for legal aid, there's a number of different ways of doing that. Of course, we have the QR code here. By far, the most popular way for folks to call us, which is the number here, 888-817-3777. But we can also go online. We have an online intake system, which you can apply in both English or Spanish. And folks can go in, put in an intake, and folks will call them back from our intake department. We have an amazing intake staff. They will call folks back within 2 to 3 business days. But of course, our offices are open to the public as well. So Cleveland on West 6th Street can be accessed 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And Elyria and Jefferson offices can be accessed Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 to 5. And so folks understand what happens in the intake process. It's pretty simple. We hope that at the end of the intake call, folks know what's going to happen next. So they start with an application, and our intake specialists ask all the demographic information, and then we can determine eligibility. That comes in financial eligibility, but also problem eligibility. We'll talk a bit more about that. And in the end, whether we can help by full representation, help by assisted pro se, advice or information, folks should know at the end of that call what comes next. And again, eligibility for our services, 200% or less of the federal poverty level, a asset limit of $15,000 or less. That would not include your home that you live in or the cars that you use for transportation. Those would be excluded. That would be, for example, if someone had $20,000 in a savings account, that would make them ineligible. But if they just happen to own their home, that does not, discount their eligibility. The important thing is that legal aid, we're really good at what we do, and we're really intentional about the types of cases we take. So we look to see what kind of issue is it. Of course, if it's a criminal issue, we're not going to touch that. We're going to refer them to the appropriate person. Depending on the county you live in, here in Cuyahoga County, we would refer them to the public defender. We also look at whether a private attorney would take the case. Most of the cases that we help folks with, private attorneys would never take them without a large retainer or a large income for a person to support that legal work. And then we also look at what's at risk. And of course, the big question is there a legal solution? Sometimes folks come to us and we're not the right stop. Maybe their issue is a public benefits issue that is not legal in nature. They simply need to go to apply. And so we look at those to make sure we're not sending them in the wrong direction. And of course, as lawyers, we have to ensure that there are no conflicts in the case to make sure that we can adequately represent people within the rules of professional conduct.
So at Legal Aid, we provide scope of services we provide exists along the spectrum. And everything from information on one end, brief advice, to, I knew I'd mess that up.
That's more for the recording,
course.
so people can watch at home.
So we provide services along a spectrum, right? On one end, there's information, and then it goes to brief advice. And on the other end, there's extended representation. Usually something like that could involve litigation. So it's a long-term engagement. But we want to assist folks who need a level of legal assistance anywhere along that spectrum, right? Not everyone needs a 5-year case in federal court. A lot of people just need to be pointed in the right direction so that they can solve their own problems. Our brief advice clinics are an example of how we try to provide that service throughout our service area in all 5 counties. And I brought a calendar of our weekly brief advice clinics where anyone can come to legal aid. They're not going to be prevented from seeing a lawyer by their level of income. They can sit down, talk to a lawyer about their problem for about 10 to 20 minutes, and receive some brief advice about where to go next. Those cases sometimes get referred to legal aid for more extended representation, but the vast majority of them just last with those 20 minutes. Somebody can get some information that they need, they can get some resources, maybe we could assist with the pleading, and then they're on their way. And like I said, I brought a calendar of our brief advice clinics through June here, and you can see an updated calendar on our website through that QR code. Consistent with trying to get folks what they need, we also have a couple of hotlines. So separate from our intake system, someone can call legal aid with questions about tenant rights. There's the tenant info line. They leave a message, and somebody will get back to them from legal aid, usually within 1 to 2 business days, to answer their question. They don't get legal advice in this type of engagement, but they get information. And similarly, we have an economic justice info line that people could talk with questions about work, workers' compensation, et cetera. And education outreach. We do a lot of education, a lot of outreach. Eric is excellent and responsible for much of it. So we do presentations to groups. Those can be partners, they could be community groups, they could be tenants at a multi-housing building. We issue a wide variety of brochures that we update regularly. I brought a stack of them here that relate to our range of practice areas. We have FAQs online. Our website itself is a great resource for legal information. There's a resource tab, and it has all of our brochures essentially, plus more information divided by category. It's really well laid out. And then we also attend resource fairs all over our service area. They could be, education resource fairs, health resource fairs, back to school fairs, that sort of thing. We provide training, so substantive trainings to partners to make sure that partners know what we do, how to connect to us, but also are informed with, for instance, basic landlord-tenant rights, right? So that they can be a resource for the population that they serve. We provide technical assistance, referral support to make sure that folks who have cases to refer to legal aid can do so efficiently and effectively. And again, resource fairs with our providers. You can connect with us a wide variety of ways. Of course, we have our website that has the most information. We're on LinkedIn, X. We have a YouTube channel where we post videos, Facebook and Instagram. The idea is we want to connect with our service population in any way possible so that they can get the legal assistance that they need. That's it for now. Any questions for Kim, Eric, or Matt?
Well, thank you, first of all. I have a couple of questions, and then I'll turn it over to colleagues. This is very informative, so I appreciate you taking the time to be here. One question I had was when you were talking about the group representation, so with the income limits, so how does that work with a group?
It's a very good question. So when it comes to group cases, it's a similar process but slightly different. We will look at a group's assets, so not any one individual's assets, but the group asset in some circumstances. We can represent a group where the core group of leaders, the ones who are forming that group, maybe getting it started, if they individually qualify for legal aid services, we can represent that group. On the other hand, if it's a group that serves, has it explicit in their mission that they serve the population that we do, that they serve people that would financially qualify for legal aid assistance, we can represent that group. When I was thinking we consider group assets, I was more thinking about our entrepreneurship program and small businesses. We consider the assets of the business.
Great. Okay, so so if a group was, let's say, a small nonprofit or like you mentioned, a block club or some sort of group. Okay, and then you also mentioned at the beginning about one of the areas being around making sure that folks potentially with disabilities or language barriers. So is that also income limited or not so much?
It is,
okay.
Unfortunately.
Okay, and then I had another question. Oh, so you talked about the trainings with the tenant rights, landlord sort of things. Have you ever been involved with our landlord? We have a regular program for folks who are landlords here in Lakewood, where they have to attend. Councilwoman Striebeck would know more about this than I do, but as a landlord, but with people who want to be landlords in Lakewood attend a seminar with the city or workshop or something like that to get their licensure renewed. And I just wondered if there was an opportunity there, or if you have worked with that training at all.
I don't know that we've, I'm going to ask Matt because he is the housing.
Yeah, no, to my knowledge, we haven't.
Okay.
I have discussed it with someone at some point, and I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's definitely something we'd be interested in being involved with if we could be.
Yeah, it's just a thought. I mean, that's geared more towards the landlord, but also sometimes we have, a fair number of landlords who it's just live on one half and rent the other, and maybe aren't familiar with what all the rules are and want to make sure that they're respecting their tenants' rights and familiar with all those things. So.
I was a housing attorney for many years, and we need good landlords as well as good tenants.
Yes.
So we're happy to talk.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I will turn over council colleagues' questions. Councilman Hamilton Steiner.
First of all, thank you so much for what you do. This is a service that is tremendously needed. And I know especially in our community, it just seems there's always some sort of issue or some sort of need, as I'm sure you know, and you have all those statistics. So going back to the assets, and when you said it's the $15,000 a household, is that inclusive of any retirement accounts that individual may have? Life insurance policies, all of that, is that so those household assets, are you counting all of those as well?
So generally speaking, yes. It depends on if there's a penalty for liquidation. So if you're 45 and you have a 401k, we wouldn't count that because there's going to be such a large penalty for you to take that out. If you're 65 and you're accessing it, and you could take out more from it, then yes, we're going to look at that. We try to be as inclusive as we can within the boundaries that we have, because we understand that we are the only shop for low-income folks who need civil legal assistance. So, if someone just got a great job and they're making $70,000 a year but have been unemployed for the last 3 years, we're going to look at that. We're going to look at that as a whole, because you can't access $70,000 on day one. So we really do try to be inclusive. And what I would say is if there are folks that who are experiencing a civil legal issue who might be close, just send them to us and let us take a look, because again, we try to be as inclusive. We are not the gatekeepers. We are trying to be door openers.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So it sounds like more like a holistic approach to for a holistic approach for individuals. So
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilman Striebeck.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. This is very, very informative. Ms. Barnett Mills, I did have a question about the letter that you sent to Council President Keppel. In that, over the past year, 195 unique legal cases in Lakewood involving a number of different things here. And then, are you familiar with the letter I'm referring to?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then it goes on to give percentages. And I'm just a little curious if we could possibly see those broken out by specific cases, because 100% of one is one.
It's true. That's a true statement.
And I would just be interested to see, where are we falling short as a city? You know, are there gaps in our codified ordinances that we can detect, just specifically on the cases that you're handling? And if we could plug those holes with that information, I think that would be very helpful.
Absolutely, we can get you those numbers.
Thank you. And I think one of the shortfalls in our codified ordinances is the legal requirements of lead notifications. I think we fall short there. In fact, when I looked through that today, I couldn't find anything specifically that said that landlords or realtors, right, in the transfer of property must notify the new homeowner or new tenant of possible lead in the house. And we know, of course, every house in Lakewood at one point, if it was completely remediated or not, had lead. So this is something, you know, that we definitely need to look into and to keep working with you all on.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
Vice President Baker.
Thank you, everyone. When I was a private attorney, I did brief advice clinics, and Eric probably knows, donated more when I had more income as a private attorney, but I still always try to contribute to the cause. You all do wonderful work, and I appreciate you coming this evening to share some of that with us. I am curious, I know we allocated some COVID relief money towards the housing, and I, just as someone who's represented both folks that in a, you know, pro bono capacity, and then whenever you're an attorney against someone who doesn't have an attorney, it's actually harder. So you appreciate having someone to kind of speak about the law so that there's kind of a clear understanding and a mutual understanding between the parties. And it creates more efficiencies, and attorneys' times is money, and that's how we quantify. So I'm just curious if you can go through how it's gone so far, how the funding has helped, where we can go in the future, kind of where we were, where we are, where we're going, would be really helpful for us, I think.
Matt, do you want to?
Oh, sure, gladly. Yeah. So I think that funding, it's been over a year, maybe almost 2 years since we've been utilizing that funding. And a couple of things that happened. Obviously, we've increased our presence here in the municipal court, mostly representation in eviction cases. We've done some other things too, but being here in the courthouse, it makes a big difference because, number one, we can see who are the landlords who are frequently filing evictions, and like you say, when we engage, when we're representing tenants, we're greasing the wheels. Not only like we are working towards the goals of our client, which in most cases isn't to win the eviction case, right? Because that doesn't actually get much for a tenant to win the case. What you really want to see is either they have a smooth path to moving out, or we can put them in a position where they can catch up on their rent or remedy whatever the issue is. And so I think the more that we're able to appear in court here, the more we're able to sort of set the precedent for what that process is for helping tenants either catch up, whether it's through rent assistance or some other means, or setting up a practical way for tenants to move out before an eviction judgment is issued against them. And the other thing that we see is, like, we get more in touch with the issues that tenants in the community are facing. So what we've seen here, I think, is issues, not so much, we haven't seen all that much with regard to the presence of lead in the homes of the tenants we've been representing, but other conditions issues, pest infestations, mold due to leaky pipes, that sort of thing. So we're able to intervene in those situations, and hopefully, you know, if it's a landlord who's got more than one property, or it's a multi-unit building, representing one tenant but definitely would eventually lead to remedies for other tenants in those buildings. So that's what we've seen, and I think we're a little ahead of schedule in terms of utilizing that funding. I think we have till the end of next year to utilize it all, but I'm guessing we're going to probably use it all up before then.
And the next question is, you know, are there, obviously COVID, and I have followed your headcount generally, and I know, you know, some of the relief funds that came down, whether it's through the feds, the state, the county, or cities in this instance, kind of gave you guys the opportunity to kind of buff up your operations, which is good. I think it's helpful to the general legal community. The question is how do we sustain that? And it's micro, it's in Lakewood, right? But I'm more generally, you know, across your service area. Are you finding new funding sources? I mean, this dais has some of the solution for you, but not all of it, right? And because I do think that your presence, it creates smoother outcomes and more efficient outcomes. And it doesn't always mean that the tenant is 100% right, but you're right, as their legal representation, you're gonna try to find the outcome that's best for them. And a lot of times lawyers can remove the kind of the animosity in a dispute and kind of just get to the resolution, which is really important. And ultimately what that person wants. So I'm just curious of how you guys are looking at the outlook now of funding generally and then in this region specifically for your services.
Yeah, I will say, you know, it's certainly the amount of funding available across our service area is not what it was a few years ago. Like you said, in the midst of COVID, there was more money available for representing tenants. So, of course, it's not true in Lakewood because we have the funding here, but in those other places where we don't have that funding, we have to be more targeted. We have to try to limit our representation to tenants who we think the result of the case will have an impact beyond just that one tenant. So places like Lakewood and Cleveland, we're still representing folks, you know, with relative frequency because we have the money to, but in those other parts of our service area, we try to be more selective, pick specific cases where we think either this is a building where there's a bunch of tenants all having the same, you know, issue, or this is an issue that we're seeing with one landlord over and over again. We try to be selective to have an impact in those communities because we don't have the resources to represent nearly as many tenants.
And lastly, I'm curious where the income limits come from. Is that driven, so you say you try to be as creative as possible. Is that driven from your funding or is that like the bylaws of your 501c3? Like what, I'm curious as to where that comes from.
Yeah, that comes from the federal funding source in most situations. Now there are some other funding sources that we have different income limits on, but for the most part, the funding that we have from the federal government limits our representation of folks above 200%.
Well, I mean, thank you all for your work and thank you for coming here tonight, taking time from your loved ones to come to council. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Along that line, and I'll come over here, is there concern, and I apologize that I don't know, but is there concern about federal funding continuing to come?
So our federal funder is the Legal Services Corporation. What we've really done in our development department over the last 20 years is try to diversify our funding streams away from our federal funder. So currently it's about 15 to 20% of our funding. At this point, because of the continuing resolution in Congress, we are funded from our federal funder, LSC, through at least the end of September. There is some concern that DOJ is looking at Legal Services Corporation, but at this point, what we're being told from the Legal Services Corporation is that they have great contacts with Congress, which gives us our appropriation, and some administrations have zeroed out our funding in the past, but Congress has always funded us despite that. So that's a testament to the great work that we do. We do a lot of constituent service in partnership with elected officials. So I think a lot of Congress people don't want to see the funding go away because they value the services we provide. So at this point, I think we're okay, but like many organizations, we're not totally sure what could happen, but there's efforts to make sure that our public officials and Congress understand the importance of legal aid, and Legal Services Corporation.
Councilman Marks.
Thank you all for being here. I really enjoyed your presentation. I learned some things that I didn't know about legal aid before, so I appreciate the information. And because I am councilperson to Ward 4, which has a high density of rental properties, I often get calls from individuals who are more disadvantaged, who have problems with their landlords, but they're fearful to call into the city to complain. They're fearful of being evicted or their rent's raised and they can't afford another security deposit even if they're moved out. I always tell them to contact legal aid. What could you advise me? What is the best way to tell them to move forward with that? Because I know you would work hard to protect their rights, but is there something that you actually can do that would prevent the landlord from increasing their rent or working to evict them?
It certainly would depend on the situation, of course. So we see a lot of tenants who are on month-to-month tenancies, and in that situation, your landlord can raise your rent with 30 days notice, and there's not much that we could do about that. The tenants that have leases for a term of months or up to a year, then there's more that we could do with that, because oftentimes landlords will try to raise rent without, when they shouldn't be. But they jump the gun before the end of the lease. They try to raise the rent, and in that situation, we could advocate on behalf of that tenant. And in most cases, we can advocate informally, right? We don't have to haul a landlord into court. Just a phone call is often enough to remedy a situation like that, and that's something that we have been doing for Lakewood tenants who call into us.
So for instance, somebody who, it's not just raising rent, but it's the condition of the apartment that is left unattended to, where they have mold or water or rodent feces in the apartment. What is your advice to those tenants? How to best handle that? If they've gone to the landlord won't do anything about it. What is your recommendation? How do you handle it? I do get calls like that often.
Yeah, so in those situations, usually our approach is first we try the informal advocacy, right? We try to reach out to the landlord and come to a reasonable solution, and some landlords are willing to do that. The next step, usually, presuming there hasn't been an eviction or other court action filed, is to have them come down to the courthouse and deposit their rent, which they can do at the first of the month. A lot of tenants are afraid to do that because they think it will result in an eviction. And there is a law in Ohio that protects tenants against retaliation if they have complained about conditions issues. So your landlord should not be able to just terminate your lease and evict you because you're complaining about the conditions of the property or because you're depositing your rent with the court. So tenants in that situation, yeah, we'll advise them to deposit their rent. And if they're willing to do that, we'll stick with them through that process.
So they could actually contact legal aid and they could have that 15, 20-minute meeting with somebody if that would be appropriate?
Well, so for a Lakewood resident, they could call our intake line, and they would be assigned an attorney to give them advice. It would be more than just probably a 15 or 20-minute consultation. It'd be an interview, and then depending on what that attorney thought the right next step was, whether it be reaching out to the landlord, depositing rent, then the attorney would guide them through that process.
Okay, that's great. So giving them the phone number of legal aid is the right thing to do.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
And also, I'd say for folks that may not be ready for an attorney and just have a question, that's really where something like our tenant information line comes in handy, where they can call, leave a message, and legal aid will get right back to them with an answer. It's not a representation, it's not a case, but a lot of times those questions can be answered. And also, I forgot to mention, in our attempts to sort of be present in the city of Lakewood, this summer we scheduled a series of 4 Know Your Rights presentations at the Madison and Main Library branches. They're every other month. on the second Thursday of that month. So we had our first at the Madison Branch Library in April. We have a second at the main library in June, and that'll be focused on landlord-tenant rights, or rather tenant rights and landlord-tenant law. The third will be back at Madison, and that'll be about our community economic development work, the kind of work that I do, the group work that we do. And then we'll have a fourth back at Maine in October about consumer issues and consumer rights. And I have some flyers there that I'll leave.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate all the work you do.
Councilman Evans.
All right, thanks for being here. You answered my question. I was just about to ask if you had any other outreach efforts like workshops, so that sounds great. But thanks for being here. I really enjoyed the presentation, and thanks for everything you do. I really appreciate how well, not even just your slideshow today was laid out, but I did spend some time poking around the website in anticipation tonight, and I felt it was, really pretty user-friendly for some things that are really complex and, not so hard for folks to find their way to the information they need. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Thanks for everything. Thanks.
Yep, Councilman Steiner.
Sorry, just a couple things that popped up. I have always been said that I have the heart of a social worker, which I do. But I did not go into social work. And the reason I didn't go into social work is because I knew I would get frustrated by seeing the same types of clients, and not necessarily the same client, but the same types of clients with the same issues and the same problems. So my question is, if you're, for Lakewood specifically, are you seeing some common themes and issues, and do you have some ideas of like root causes, and maybe they're just particular landlords that are problematic? And do you have any ideas, like, have you talked directly to like the building departments, like, hey, this is an ongoing issue, we're seeing these many clients come through? Like, what ideas do you have? Because I think that there's an opportunity to really get at the root cause of some of these problems, so you're not seeing those same types of clients come through your door.
So I think with regard to the housing issues that we see, yes, there are a few landlords that we have seen as sort of problematic. And the thing is, though, we are also tied to what our clients want to have happen. Right. So if we have a client who, even if they have a problematic landlord, they may still want to stay there, yeah, and they may still want to maintain a good relationship with that landlord, even if they are living in substandard conditions. And we have to respect that, and our goal is always our client's goal, right? So in those situations, we're often limited by what our clients want to do. I will say that if we do have a client who is interested in sort of taking extra steps, we have on a few occasions. So, for example, if there's an eviction case filed, we can file counterclaims. We can file affirmative claims on behalf of tenants to try to elevate those conditions issues. With regard to interacting with the building department, I know of at least a few cases that we have, but I would have to talk to the individual attorneys who represent folks here in Lakewood to probably give you a better idea. And I'm glad to do it. And I think maybe to the extent we're reporting back to you on the funding that we've been using, maybe a part of that report can be, letting you know how we've interacted with the building department and what we've done outside of just our case work.
Yeah, that would be great. And I don't, again, I'm outside the legal world, so as far as naming names, I'm not necessarily saying that. Again, I don't know those legal ramifications. I would have to lean into your expertise for that. But just the common sort of issues that we're seeing, that things that council, that we would have the power to really focus on and work on, is where my concern would be. So thank you for that. Yeah, I would appreciate if you could include that additional information in the report. I think that would be really helpful.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing is, as far as your outreach events, one of the things I do hear from people is that the time does not always work for them, which I understand. You all have lives as well. You know, this is a 9 to 5 sort of thing. But have you thought about alternative workshops that you could do and host in Lakewood? Or maybe you've tried it and it just hasn't worked out in the past. I would be interested to know that.
We have regular brief advice clinics on the weekends and other clinics in the evenings. The Know Your Rights events in Lakewood, for instance, they all start at 6 o'clock in the evening in an attempt to make it accessible to as many folks as possible. And to your earlier question, we're always looking for patterns, right? Because we want to, we have a mandate to advocate for systemic change, to attack the roots of problems, the roots of poverty. And that's, in our work with partners, they're an excellent source of information. So not only do we give information to our partners so that they can disseminate that information to the folks they work with, we get information from them, from the client communities that they work with that don't necessarily reach us, right? That don't apply for cases. So, for instance, we may hear from a nonprofit partner in the neighborhood about a problematic building. And with that information, we can act on it and be more cognizant of sort of where problems pop up, but also more broadly, what patterns are appearing where. So that's how we sort of rely on our partners to enhance our work, right?
Yeah, thank you. And I actually wrote down root causes because that's why I didn't go into social work, and that's why I went into government, because I want to get at the root causes of issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Strubig.
Thank you. Mr. Vincel, I have a memorandum from you to Cleveland Heights Councilman Jim Petrus in the work that you did with them on their ordinance 244-2024 this winter to include the tenants' rights and responsibilities for their residents there. Do you know, or are you keeping track of any results from this, what are we calling it? The form set forth. Is there any tracking of any evidence? Can you talk about this for a minute, about what prompted this, and if there are if you're seeing any positive results by working with the city to disseminate some of this educational material?
Yes, and now I will say that the ordinance was passed fairly recently, and it required the development of the materials you're referring to. And those we just completed the development of those, and I should say the city completed the development of those materials. So I don't think, in terms of results, I don't think we have any tracking of the results going on yet. I'm hopeful that City Council does. Now, that what is being disseminated and what you're referring to was, it started out as us working with a few of the council members in Cleveland Heights City Council to develop sort of a tenant's bill of rights. But it evolved in sort of what you see is a tenant's bill of rights and responsibilities. And the idea is that this is something that landlords would be required to give their tenants at the time, at the beginning of their tenancy, so that tenants are educated about what their rights are, what their responsibilities are, while they're tenants in the city of Cleveland Heights. And also so they have, so there's that interaction between the landlord and the tenant at the outset of the tenancy, and that, each of the parties involved in the transaction understands what the rights and responsibilities of the other is. I'm hopeful that, we will see some changes as a result of it. Again, like I said, we don't have anything yet, because I'm not even sure I don't think they have started requiring it yet, because they just completed the development of the materials, but we're hopeful that it will have an impact.
Thank you, and thank you for this work. As an educator, I love that it's not just tenants' rights, but it's also the responsibilities. Also, as a landlady, not and often villainized, right? That they too have responsibilities, and almost makes me want to look for the landlord rights and responsibilities companion piece to this. So we have two, right? So we have one that says As a tenant, here are your rights and responsibilities, and as a landlord, here are your rights and responsibilities. I know that's probably not in your purview, but food for thought at any rate. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Sure.
I appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you. We have about 8 minutes. Councilman Bullock?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, everybody from Legal Aid. I have 6 questions, and several of them are big, deep thought questions we won't have time for, but that's what I get for going last. Good to see all of you. Eric Meinhardt, pillar of Lakewood community, thanks for being here. Also, Lindsay Gardina, Ward 1 resident. It turns out she's one of your attorneys, and she's a good friend. I'm glad that you've got a good person in her working with you. She makes a suggestion. Could we, Law Director, use Cove Community Center as a place for a Know Your Rights presentation or a semi-regular legal clinic location? It's a good location.
So we have used Cove quite a bit last year, actually. And we found that we were seeing the same folks coming. So we wanted to make sure that we're expanding it, not just at Cove, but all over Lakewood, throughout all of the 4 wards, because we want to make sure that everyone has the benefit of that information.
Great. But also Cove, too?
Yes.
Okay. And Law Director, I thought the chair's suggestion was a very strong one, that we would invite legal aid to a landlord. Do we know the calendar for the landlord trainings in 2025?
Through the chair, thank you, Councilman. I don't know the calendar specifically, but I do know the last few years since COVID, it's been done online. So if there's going to be inclusion of legal aid, we would have to restructure it to do it in person. It would require some involvement of the building department. So it would need some deliberation and thought.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I see the mayor's here. I know that over the years that's been a strong tool for Lakewood, really kind of professional engagement, almost a continuing legal education credit series. But for the landlord, cottage industry, which arguably is one of Lakewood's top, if not the top industry, and sometimes it's been the law department that's hosted or led that. Sometimes it's been the building department. Sometimes it's been find out about other dimensions of the city of Lakewood. But what strikes me here is that legal aid is in many ways a Swiss Army knife of many useful functions. And so, and Councilman Baker also kind of suggested it's a helpful problem-solving asset to the conversation when you have legal representation to help with any of these issues, employment, financial debt, the relationship with the landlord. So there's probably win-wins to be gained is I guess what I'm learning and driving at. And I think it would be wonderful to basically leverage the deep and varied experience of legal aid to make the connections. I mean, I've been aware of legal aid, but I must confess I didn't know the depth and the breadth of what you do, and now I'm benefiting from tonight, so thanks for scheduling this. So I really do think there's some upside to be gained, because that's some impressive results that are reported for 2024 successes. So 195 cases, unique cases, 90% success, improving the financial standing, reducing debt, improving legal immigration status, secured safety, so for example, a landlord typically wouldn't be directly engaged in a domestic issue, meaning a domestic dispute or domestic violence issue, but the landlord benefits if legal aid is available to help resolve that. Fair statement. So I'm really kind of, excited, persuaded, something like that, about the value of really integrating our work together as much as we can. I'll have to save other questions for the legal aid team. It does strike me that perhaps the thresholds of income for qualifying for services are too low. We find that ourselves in our own housing. We have various housing programs, and it's the same federal requirements that transfer. I don't know what the solution is, but I'm guessing there's more need beyond the 200% threshold. Would that be a fair statement?
more need beyond
Yeah,
the threshold?
do you
that
have
we've-
a pool of hypothetical or potential clients that might have income at 205 or 300% of federal poverty? You
Yes.
can't serve them, but if that was fixed, you could do some good for them, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the need is great, and it does exceed 200%, but we are limited to that 200%.
You're targeted at that, right? Well, that does plenty of good, too. So, well, thanks for coming in, and maybe I could do some informal additional Q&A with you guys.
Absolutely.
Much appreciated, thanks.
Thank you. All right, we are just about at time, and we have our next meeting. I just want to thank you all again for taking the time to be here this tonight, and for all the work that you do to serve our Lakewood community. I know we'll all be picking up some of those flyers, so if you want to leave everything with the clerks too, I know folks will want to distribute those and share them also in our materials. And council members, it sounds like there's a lot of great ideas of how we can continue working together, so I encourage you to connect with Legal Aid directly and continue those conversations. So thank you again for being here and for all you do.
Thank you.
Without objection, Committee of the Whole is adjourned. We'll take just a few minute break to get reset before we start the next meeting.
How it's doing. I can follow up with him and see if they're tracking and, that would be good to know. I mean, all education is good, right? But it's even better work. Right.
Chair for that side. Another chair, yeah. Oh, okay. Actually, I'm not sure. Because I want to make sure if there might be one of these available. If not all members of the planning commission are here. Hello. So there's this chair here we don't need. That's chair.
Your name?
What?
Your name?
What are you talking about?
I was joking. I was saying your name as in like your name.
Hey.
How are you?
Good. Okay, so I think you're on that commission here.
Oh, I am.
Yep. Team admin, team planning. Sorry, Chris.
Got me all out of whack.
I know. Okay, so good. What's that?
Try to stay under the radar, so wherever that seat is. We'll pass around maybe. William, yeah. Perfect. Tomorrow.
Oh, cool. I'm
Yeah.
going on Thursday, the day game.
Oh, yeah, that'll be
because
nice.
I have to come to planning commission.
Yeah.
That night, so if I show up late, you'll know what happened. You know, average time 2.5 hours.
I'd love to pitch
It's
black.
not so. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not so much. It's not as bad. I mean, used to it's kind of ridiculous, but
I like the pitch black not only because I think it makes better baseball, but like Christy will go to more games.
yeah. Well, Barbara, I'll tell you what makes a difference for Barbara is all the different places because she doesn't really like to just sit
Yeah.
and watch.
Now
So
you can,
the
like,
fact
walk
that you can go to started out, we would just get a district ticket
Yeah,
and just go kind of wander around.
Yeah.
But now they got that place up in the top. And,
I'm excited to see that where they had all the glass and stuff. There's
Yeah.
now a little standing room. I want to go see all that. Yeah.
well, we went a couple of times last year when that was all under construction, and they just basically like behind in the top section, kind of like sort of like the standing room in the district, and then just a big party area.
Yeah, I know.
It was kind of cool. We just mostly hung out there.
Yeah. Looks great.
Hi, Hannah.
How are you?
Good.
Are Lakewood schools spring break always? Yeah, so it just kind of. Your kids are Lakewood? Your kids are not Lakewood? Okay.
He's a mixed bag.
Wow. So this year they were all joint, same way? Ooh, was he in Rome for your event? Yeah? Yeah, that's wild. An experience. Yes.
Oh, yes, it's Tuesday. Go for it.
Yeah.
I'm
Is that home or-
not sure what'll happen tomorrow, but
I just had a moment.
that's what happens when you have an active day over the weekend. More stuff. You kids?
All right. All right, we will call to order the joint meeting of Planning Commission and Committee of the Whole. Chair McDermott, if you want to call your meeting to order as well.
Great, thank you very much. We will call to order Joint Planning Commission meeting of April 28th.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and for taking on this special meeting. We thought it was important to have this conversation between Planning Commission, Council, and Administration all together rather than back and forth multiple times, for more efficient. Unfortunately, it did get scheduled on a Cavs game night, so I apologize about that, but in advance. So tonight we have 4 items on the agenda. The first one is just the communication, sort of explaining the process of how we got here. We also have Ordinance 16/2025, which is the ordinance about complete streets, the infrastructure. And then Ordinance 17/2025, which is the ordinance about the Complete and Active Streets Education and Advisory Board. So before we get started, I know we have some folks signed in to speak. I'm happy to take those now if you want, if you're wanting to get home for the game. I want to be respectful of that. If you're planning to stay anyway, that's fine too. But just for clarification, again, the ordinances that are on the docket tonight are talking about process of future infrastructure projects and as well as citizen increasing a citizen engagement through the citizen advisory board that's being proposed. They're not specifically about the Bunce Road project. But again, we'll be taking public comment at the end. If anybody would rather go now so that you can get home, I'd be happy to take you now. No? No takers? Okay, come on up. Just the button.
Is that better? My name is Jeff Dujic, resident of Bunce Road. I wanted to thank the council for an opportunity to speak, and along with some of my neighbors. I am here because of Bunce Road. I'm just a citizen, not a council member. I'm trying to get up to speed with how things work. I have some concerns, and I think the concern was that there's an emergency measure being taken. And excuse me for drawing some parallels, but I have seen in this community and in these council meetings how we've spoken up against federal legislation that's happened in the past 100 days that was enacted because of emergencies. This included tariffs on our nearest neighbors, that has impact on our economy, employment, our savings accounts, our 401ks. We see deportations taken with little due process or consideration that we're doing it right, including deporting American citizen children. And I'll stop there. I'm not trying to over-dramatize Bunce Road, but I think there are legitimate safety concerns. I know there are legitimate safety concerns. The lived experience of people on Bunce Road, we know what traffic is like, and I'm not going to go into detail on that on this night. I just don't understand, honestly, and maybe I'll find out from this meeting why this needs to be an emergency measure. I know on the federal level, it was done because the government did not want to listen to voices it didn't want to listen to. And as I've been exposed to this process, it seems the city's foregone conclusion was the city wants a bike lane. I want a bike path too. I am all about bike paths, but I want it to be safe and I want it to be done in the right spot. And it doesn't seem that all voices are being heard. So I asked the city, and you probably have come up with your own conclusions on how to vote. Just ask that, let's give this some time. Let's listen to all viewpoints. Let's make sure that this is done in a safe way. And that's my ask of you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, come on up, Kim.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure many of you know, Kim McDonald. I live on Bunce Road also. I'm not specifically going to speak to Bunce Road right now, but I wanted to urge council to put a pause on this vote on the Safe Streets ordinance. I believe that passing legislation on a fast track makes the decision seem rushed, and that it leads one to believe that it's not being given the same thoughtful consideration that other legislation typically gets. It would seem that a special interest group is pushing the speed of this vote. It also seems that other stakeholders do not get consideration for their views. Yet, we all have the same priority, making our streets safe for all users. I know we all agree cars should not be our first priority. We live in a wonderful walkable city. I walk daily in our city. I ride my bike as well. However, I wonder, why do cyclists get priority over pedestrians? The present active transportation plan and Safe Streets initiative always lists pedestrians first and then cyclists. Contrary to the stated goal of making Lakewood more walking and biking friendly, I think the safety of pedestrians has taken a back seat to the cyclists. And contrary to the stated goal of making Lakewood more walkable and bikeable, more friendly, I think the safety of, I already said that, sorry, I lost my place. Okay, so, I definitely feel like the pedestrians are taking a back seat to the cyclists, and I'm not comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with our street as it is, where kids ride their bikes to school on the sidewalk. It's fine. But to encourage more, I think that's not keeping pedestrians safe. In fact, I think the multimodal paths create dangers for both the pedestrians and the cyclists. I believe formally segregating the two makes each safer. And I said, let's explore other alternatives rather than trying to shove a square peg in a round hole. We can and we must design better transportation infrastructure. One of the comments made today on the website, it asks for revisions to be made. Why not take time? Why not carefully consider these revisions that were proposed and others before passing this ordinance as it is? Why should enacting it on an emergency basis be absolutely necessary? Please pause, table this for a future meeting. Give everyone a seat at the table, and together we can improve the plan. Thank you.
Yes. Vice President Baker.
Thank you. And to kind of lay out the process a little bit, because I think that there is, you know, tonight, we're not, full council is not voting on this. It is, for all intents and purposes, a work session with Planning Commission to get their input in a joint fashion so that we can, and allow public comment. This is not an estate to be passed, and it will not be passed this evening. We don't have a full council meeting with which to do so. And the emergency ordinance part of it, as I think President Keppel discussed a little last meeting, is just that when it's passed, it becomes effective quicker. But at the same time, we have had conversations about this, and in fact, a year ago, it was actually introduced a different ordinance, but it's very similar in construct to what is it before us now. But that said, because council cannot deliberate more than 3 members at one time, because 4 members would be a ability to pass something. 3 members worked really hard on this with the administration and brought it forward. And the 3 co-sponsors don't know what our colleagues think about this ordinance. So that's why we're here. That's why we're having the discussion. That's why we're having public comment. That's why we're getting Planning Commission's comments, because it isn't fully baked, and we know that. And we want to get that input to make sure that what we come out with at the end of this process, and it could take weeks, months. I don't know how long it's going to take. It's folks' comments are going to drive that, both on Planning Commission and the public and our colleagues and the administration. So nothing's being passed tonight. We're getting this input, but appreciate that and just wanted to clarify that so everyone was clear as where we're at. I can go into that.
Yeah, thank you. Did anyone else want to do the public comment now? Come on.
I'm going to comment on both of them, the 1625 and the 172025. And because everything is not clear, I'm going to read what I have written. Okay. I'm here tonight to ask you to vote no on Ordinance 17-2025, so this proposal cannot go through can go through a full and transparent public process. The ordinance would create a permanent, complete, and active streets advisory board to guide multimodal transportation planning, including projects like Bunce Road. While input on transportation is important, there is no emergency here, and it should not be treated as one. The use of the effective immediately clause, the normal legislation process, limiting transparency, and excluding the public from decisions with long-term consequences. Lakewood residents expect an open debate, especially when permanent changes like a new board are being added to the city code. The ordinance also lacks critical details, such as how the board members will be selected, what authority the board will have, and how it will be funded and held accountable. This vagueness opens the door for special interest groups to influence the process, potentially overshadowing the needs and priorities of everyday residents. There has been no meaningful public outreach, no transparency about costs, and no clear evidence of widespread community support for multimodal network. Establishing a permanent board without addressing these concerns is an overreach and does not provide a sufficient foundation for such an important change. This is not about opposing good planning, it's about ensuring we follow a transparent process. In a healthy democracy, the public deserves the opportunity to ask questions, provide input, and be heard. So again, I respectfully ask you to vote no on Ordinance 17, 2025, and let's take the time to get this right with the transparency and public input Lakewood deserves. Now, I'm going to 16, 2025, as written, because I urge you not to pass this ordinance. While the intent to improve safety and accessibility is commendable, the ordinance is premature and lacks key data to justify immediate enactment. First, there has been no published traffic impact analysis or cost-benefit assessment associated with implementing a complete streets policy citywide. Without understanding the financial burden on taxpayers or how existing infrastructure will be modified, we risk overcommitting resources without a clear return on investment. Second, the ordinance language is vague and overly broad. Terms like equitable multimodal transportation and livability are subjective and can lead to inconsistent implementation. This could result in expensive and unnecessary changes, such as lane reduction or costly sidewalk expansions in areas where they might not be needed or supported by residents. Third, Lakewood already has infrastructure in place supporting bikes, pedestrians, and public transit. Before mandating a new policy, we should conduct a comprehensive audit of current assets and needs, identifying problem areas backed by crash data and usage metrics. Policy should be guided by evidence, not by assumptions. Finally, fast-tracking this ordinance requires 2/3 approval to take effect immediately, bypasses the public feedback process. Residents deserve the opportunity to weigh in through forums, surveys, and/or public comment sessions. In short, we need data, transparency, and public input before enacting a sweeping policy like this. I respectfully ask the council to vote no and delay passage until more thorough evaluation is completed. Thank you.
Mr. Herberger, did you want to go now or wait till? Oh, okay. I didn't.
Good evening, everybody. Shannon Mortland, 2125 Bunce. And while I understand that we're not here tonight about Bunce and that this plan is not directly related to Bunce, it will be. And I live in Lakewood because I love the diversity and I love the inclusivity. And right now I'm not seeing that inclusivity for all of us. You guys have made great strides in the past couple of meetings, and I applaud that, and it's as it should be. But please don't leave those of us out who are concerned. I still don't understand the reasoning for making this an emergency session, especially when I look at this plan and it says you're going to adhere to recommendations from places like ODOT and the Federal Highway Administration. We all know they've been ignored thus far when it comes to Bunce. I've pointed that out numerous meetings, and I can point it out again if you'd like. So the fact that you've put that into this plan just makes me wonder how much it's really been read or discussed or even thought through. Has it at all? I don't know. But I think we need to take some time and do this right. I admit my expectations are high, but I think you guys can meet them. I have faith in you, and I hope you do too. Just slow down and just do it right, and we won't have these problems going forward. Thank you.
I just want to reiterate again, this is not an emergency meeting. We are not passing anything tonight. We never had any plans to pass anything tonight. We cannot pass anything when we are not in a full council meeting. This is a committee meeting. It's a special meeting, not an emergency meeting. It's a special meeting because it is a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, which is part of our process of working on this ordinance in the public eye and with public comment. So just to reiterate again, we cannot and would not pass anything outside of a full council meeting. And the emergency language, which frankly I don't think any of us are particularly tied to, except that we have had many residents here, many nights on Monday nights, urgently asking us to pass Complete Streets after we've been working on it for about a year, asking us to take urgent action at certain intersections. So, you know, there has been a lot of citizen engagement asking for urgency on looking at some of these infrastructure matters. So, but again, that is just saying once it is passed, whenever that is, it would go into effect immediately rather than the 40 days. But we're still we're still following the 3 readings at least. And as Vice President Baker said, if you look at this ordinance too, it's not even fully completed yet. So this is a working session. And so just to clarify those things again. All right, Mr. Herberger, did you want to go now or do you want to wait till the end?
Good evening, Matt Herberger, 1448 Bunts Road. Thank you, actually, for clarifying a lot of stuff, both of Kyle and Sarah, because unfortunately for us, a lot of this is new. And, you know, we were all concerned about the use of an emergency ordinance. You know, we understand the what, or it was more the why. Why in this situation? So, you know, it leads to speculation of, you know, what is the goal here and what are you trying to tell us or bring to us? So, and then also we just want to let you know, I think, that this does impact what we're doing on bonds and how we feel about it. I mean, this legislation is direct, or this ordinance, both of them, directly relate to bonds. They do. And so it would be remiss for us not to show up and express our reservations, because I think they're legitimate, you know, particularly coming from people, you know, all of a sudden this is an emergency ordinance. Seems the timing is odd. I think it's natural for people to assume perhaps there's nefarious, for lack of a better word, ideas behind it. But I think what my wife said is true. I think when it does come to time to vote on it, and Kyle, you said there's work to be done, maybe it'll be a better ordinance. I think let's not compound our errors by not being transparent, and let's not compound our errors by not bringing people into the process. Because that's where I think, at least for the people on Bunts and fellow citizens that support our initiative, we got here because of a lack of transparency, I think, and to a certain degree, and a lack of communication. I do. And so I don't know what the repercussions of these ordinances are compared to for what we're doing here, you know, but it does concern me. It seems it does seem it kind of odd timing to me. It seems strange. But nonetheless, I would suggest when it comes time to vote for both of these ordinances, you vote no. And really, quite frankly, because I don't think emergency ordinances should be used for normal exigencies. I don't think there's any justification for it. I don't think there's any reason for it. I think the idea of an emergency ordinance is exactly as it implies. It is meant to get something done that has to be done. And I know everybody wants to minimize that. I get it. But it's not appropriate to use emergency ordinance in this situation. It doesn't rise to the level. That's it. Thank you very much.
Vice President Baker.
Thank you, and I'm happy to, when we get to the point of making amendments, to amend it to have it passed under regular order. That's fine. And I, you know, just a personal aside, I was sworn in February of 2022, and I emailed the planning director, Sean Leininger, that I want to get working on Complete Streets. So this is, and I understand that to folks that maybe aren't normally in City Hall and normally experiencing council meetings. We have been talking about this for my entire time on council. And really what it's about is, opening up the process in ways, and I have a lot of respect for Planning Commission. I was on Planning Commission before I got on council, where input will be, you will be able to see and provide input on a plan. That doesn't mean that everything you want will be in it, or everything anyone else wants will be in it, but you at least will have an opportunity to be heard. And I think that's important, and it kind of allows the public to be engaged in what's going forward. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, and excited to hear what everyone has to say about it.
Thank you. And I'll just add too on the same with the case, and I frankly don't recall if it has emergency language in it, but if it does, but I do feel like, given we've had a lot of dialogue in our community, both with Bunce, with Madison Hilliard, and as Vice President Baker mentioned, throughout his entire time on council, Complete Streets has been a major focus. We've been working on it for about a year with the administration. And that isn't something everybody knows. Most people aren't spending their Monday nights here. We do try to get out into the community, as many of you know that attended our community conversations last year that I published in the Lakewood Observer. I post on social media, but there's a lot going on, and understandably, most people are focused on other governmental levels right now. So we understand that, but it has been a long time. And as far as the advisory board too, part of this is, in both ordinances, the intention here is to increase engagement and transparency. So I'd encourage you to keep an open mind as we work through this process. Okay, with that, that's everybody I have signed in to give public comment. You can, if you would like to give now, you can, or you can wait till the end of the meeting if you want to stay. Come on up, Mr. Organ.
Hey, I would like to go watch the Cavs game, so I'm gonna speak now. Welcome to the 5 minutes of me getting to berate you with annoyances. Prepare yourself. Me and Amy Herberger agree on two things. Shocking, I know. Pick your jaws up off the floor. But I agree with her that the city and the public should have greater amounts of feedback on what we're doing with our streets and how we are changing our city for better or for worse. However we change our city, the public should have a greater level of feedback. So with that, I would encourage the city and the Planning Commission to take a close look at the case, how those members are appointed. I don't understand how the appointment process will work if only 2 members can have their terms expire in the same calendar year. That means that only 2 can be appointed, when the thing is passed, I guess, as written. That's the way I understand it. I'm sure you've thought through that, but it just seems a little weird, and I would like greater clarity in how those members are appointed, how their terms will work, all of that type of thing. But I think this ordinance, both of these ordinances, I suppose, allow for greater public feedback on everything that we do in the city with regard to our public rights of way. So I applaud the city for working on that. I would just really like to see this passed as soon as possible. I know that it's been a long time coming. We've all been working on this. My other big piece of feedback revolves around the active transportation plan and how often it is reviewed and revised. If it's only 10 years as currently written, for instance, we have 2 major housing developments coming in, one at the pit and the other one at the former Steve Barry Buick location. That's likely going to change traffic patterns, population density, all those types of things along a major thoroughfare. And as written now, the active transportation plan does nothing for Detroit Road. So if we don't update how often the active transportation plan is revised, I feel like there is a lot of opportunity for changes to be made such as new housing developments or what have you. And then the street doesn't have an opportunity to get changed for 10, 20, 30 years the next time the street is repaved. That presents a huge problem for me. I ride on Detroit all the time. I know a lot of people don't do that because there's no bike infrastructure. It's dangerous. We know that having more bike infrastructure will increase the amount of people that feel safe and comfortable biking, even for short trips. It may not eliminate cars from anybody's household, but if you can get around just to your everyday trips within Lakewood, whether you're going to the park, going to a restaurant, going grocery shopping, something like that, if you can do that on a bike and then you take your car to work downtown or Independence or whatever, that's going to eliminate a lot of traffic. It's going to calm traffic, make our city safer, quieter, and better for the people that live here and come here every day for work. So thank you. I hope that this passes as quickly as possible, and I look forward to all of the minutes from this meeting and the revisions that happen. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Yep, come on up, Cassie.
Hi, Cassie Organ. I don't have anything prepared, but I do know there's a number of e-comments, and I just wanted to come up and highlight a couple things from the ones that I submitted. So first being in terms of the ordinance, I do, of course, support the ordinance. I think it's been something that's taken a lot of time to get to this point. So I know that you all have worked very hard on it. And given that it's been a year plus that we've been looking towards putting an ordinance in place, I think having it as an emergency ordinance makes sense. We've already waited such a long period of time to get something like this put into effect, and putting it in as an emergency ordinance just shows that we're taking that seriously and we are working towards enacting change sooner rather than waiting for more people to get hurt or killed. So just wanted to state that. I don't believe it's a rushed plan because I've been here almost every Monday night over the past year, so I know what has gone into it, and I know all the work that's been put into it, so thank you for that. The other piece with the case advisory board, I think it's an awesome idea. Like Robbie said, it's great to bring the community in to speak of their experiences and their thoughts and ideas on that. The one suggestion that I have for consideration is having one of those spots be for someone who has significant experience driving through the city. I think given the climate of our city, yes, there are a lot of people who use bikes, use transit, walk, etc., but most of those people also drive. So I think you will still get that perspective from those people, from their mixed experiences traveling through the city. I know we bike here every Monday night, but we do still have a car. We're a one-car household. We know what it's like to drive through the city as well. So in lieu of that position, I would encourage you to consider maybe somebody who takes transit. I don't see that as somebody listed in the current plan, so I think that would be an interesting viewpoint to have in that advisory board. That is something that I wish we had more of in Lakewood and Cleveland, and go back to kind of our roots with the public transit. Or maybe someone who has more of a diverse experience than driving in their car. The city is already built for cars. Again, I think that viewpoint can come across easily from the people who are already listed. So just my 2 cents, and again, I appreciate all the hard work you do and for inviting us to speak. So have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I think that's everybody, unless, Mr. Mortland, did you want to? Okay. And we will not be offended if you want to go and watch the game. I've got my Cavs earring on, and Vice President Baker's got his ones. Yeah, Councilman Bullock.
Just really quickly, first of all, thanks to the residents for being here. You guys have your own personal and private lives. I know you've made an investment of time to be here consistently on a variety of perspectives on this issue. And I have a colleague who's an attorney who works for good causes, and behind him in his office, there's a plaque that says, "Give a darn," except it doesn't say darn. And I think everybody here does. And so for my colleagues, for those of us who are being held accountable by the residents, I always think we owe a debt of gratitude to residents who care enough about our city and our neighborhoods to show up here and say, hey, wait a minute. So that's number one. Thanks for being here. Number two, I'm hopeful that the ordinances that we're beginning to hear about tonight, and it's not going to be a quick or fast process, I don't think, will be a chance to be responsive to some of the points that you've been making on a pretty clear and consistent basis. There are a variety of points, including communication, including thoughtfulness, including attention to detail. I guess I approach the proposals. First of all, I got to learn myself tonight because I've looked at it. I've heard some comments from my colleagues, but we haven't gone in depth before tonight. But I'm hopeful that I look at it as a glass half full, that this could be a vehicle to capture some of your feedback, the points of feedback that you have, and include them so that we are addressing things in a way that you're providing feedback on the Bunce Road project in particular. So this is not per se about Bunce Road. It's about the whole city. It's about future projects. It could be, in broad terms, about projects like the Bunce Road project, maybe a future, who knows, but it's not specifically drawn up with that in mind. It's about the whole category. And as others have said, we've had safety challenges at other intersections like Elber and Madison, like Hilliard and Madison, and I'm missing plenty beyond that too. So we want to take it all seriously. It's my perspective, just speaking for me. Thanks.
Okay, with that, let's start diving into the ordinances themselves and get into detail. So I'm going to turn it over Vice President Baker to kick us off.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the Planning Commission. I think you have a meeting later this week, so you guys are really putting in the time. Hopefully the Cavs win tonight so you don't miss the game on Thursday if they play it. But high level, I think most people are aware, but I'll go over it a little bit. Last year there was introduced an ordinance by myself and some colleagues, Council President Keppel and Councilperson Strebig, an ordinance that was, I drafted it together with them, based a little bit more on Cleveland's ordinance, which was every single transportation project would have some sort of public meeting that Planning Commission that would then take feedback about implementing the ideas outlined in the active transportation plan. And then the administration introduced the Complete Streets policy, which basically said, we agree that Complete Streets element should be in our infrastructure planning process, but we'll do it, and we'll make sure to implement it in our projects. So the principles we all agreed on, but how we were going to implement it and what the process was going to be is what we had to work on over the past year. And throughout that process, and I know I came and spoke to all of you on Planning Commission last summer about it, and it's been on your docket for the past year. This is technically a new ordinance. Hopefully you've all had a chance at least to familiarize yourself with it a little bit. But some of the homework that we did on council that you may not be aware of is we actually brought in Jacob Van Sickle and the planner for the city of Cleveland on trails, the trails manager, and he talked about not only what their ordinance looked like, but how they're implementing it. So if you've noticed, Cleveland has done a really good job over the past, during Mayor Bibb's term, in really prioritizing neighborhoods, slowing cars down, bike infrastructure. And so we wanted to see what Phil Kidd and Jacob Van Sickle had to say about how they were implementing it. And what they came out with is, instead of going, and Cleveland's different than Lakewood, bigger, more people, bigger capital budget, more roads to take care of. But instead of going an inch deep on every project, they decided to get priority corridors and then do multiple meetings to really hone in how you can implement complete streets into those projects, into those major capital projects. So they went deeper on the more important projects and had more of an administrative process on the other projects. So that kind of kicked off a framework that we worked on with the administration to tier out projects, where you can go deeper on the projects that the active transportation plan calls out with data. There's crash data in there, there's speed data in there, there's accident data in there. It says, hey, here's the corridors that have problems. This is the high-risk network. These are the intersections that we're seeing the most incidences, that we're seeing high speeds, we're seeing pedestrian interaction with that. So how can we implement things to make them safer. So we worked with the administration to basically come up with, and we'll kind of go through this, but it's a tiered process. So a transportation project is basically when the city repaves streets. The city redoes infrastructure. If they rip up the street for a water main, and it's mostly, they're going to have to mill and fill most of it, then it's a transportation project. And then it breaks them down into tiers. So tier 1 is anything that's called out in the active transportation plan, which is available on the city's website. You can look at it. And what that does is it kind of puts those projects as, hey, this is the network that our active transportation plan called out that needs more intervention. And there's actually a menu of options within the active transportation plan about how we can make them safer. Tier 2 projects are every other project. And what we wanted to do is start out with kind of a good starting point, and it does allow for later, if we want to kick projects up into tier 1, maybe be a little bit more inclusive, we can. But we understood that this was a new process for the administration as well, so we wanted to start somewhere that didn't have all of them but had the most impactful ones. And you'll see here, Section 8, there's a discussion point about community development block grant funding. Interested in what Planning Commission thinks about that. But essentially, and the administration can explain it a little bit later too, the city gets CBDG money, at least for now. Maybe that might change. And they typically use it on census blocks that are, qualify for CBDG money, which are usually low to moderate income census blocks in the city of Lakewood. And those funds are sometimes directed towards street repaving. So there's a discussion point about whether or not if it's a tier 1 project but it has CBDG money, does it automatically become tier 2 and not get that full review? That's an open point of discussion that we had with the administration. What we introduced together with the administration was what we could all agree on. The discussion points are what we want to talk about to see what everyone thinks about it. And as you go through, you can see, what the complete streets will consider. This largely mimics what the administration had and what council had in the policy and the ordinance. Interested in Planning Commission's input or our colleagues' input on those points. But as we go through the process for tier 1, we broke it down into 2 stages. We talked with the administration about 2027. They said that they think they can get this process off the ground for projects that are done in 2027. We'd like to talk about maybe having some commitment for some process for projects that are done in 2026, understanding you might be able to not get the fully baked process. But essentially in the stage 1 submission, and you can maybe break it out into like schematic design, design development, or construction documents, or as ODOT goes, stage 1 is the earliest stage, stage 2, 3 is kind of the mid stage, and then 4, 5 is construction documents. But it's at the early stage for all of the tier 1 projects, the city will come before Planning Commission and say, hey, here's a high level of what we're thinking for this project. Here are the interventions we think we can make at this crosswalk, leading pedestrian indicators, maybe some curb bump outs, maybe we do separated bike facilities, whatever they think they can do. And then they will take Planning Commission's input and the public input, so members of the public can come and give input as well. And so one of the discussion points is about whether or not the city would basically describe why certain complete street elements that are called for in the active transportation plan are not in the plan. So then you could kind of consider that. And after the city would take all of that input, mainly the city engineer, the public works department, the planning department, they would then go back, take all that input in, and then come back with the stage 2 submission. And the stage 2 submission, for all effective purposes, is the plan. And when we talked about it with the administration and our colleagues, what we came to is that sometimes there's a public meeting and you hear and you give input, but you don't know what the plan is until they start paving or, the bulldozer comes out. So it'd be nice to at least let people know, like, hey, here's the input that you gave, here's what Planning Commission said, and here's why we could do some things and why we couldn't do some things, but here's the plan. And this is what we're going out to bid with. So basically, there's no changes at that point, but at least provides a forum for Planning Commission and the public to see what the final product is. There's a little bit of a discussion point about what Planning Commission's action is there. Interested in what Planning Commission has to say about that. And then the tier 2 projects, the process is basically more in line with the policy that the administration originally introduced, which is that they will consider complete streets elements in all projects they do. For example, the administration has talked about, I think they're repaving Norton for a gas or a water line project, and they're going to do curb bump outs there. It's near an elementary school. So that's not going to go before the process, not tier 1 project, but it's good they're doing that. And then lastly, and then a couple points going further, the active transportation plan, some folks have advocated for it to be updated more than 10 years. I see this as a floor, you know, where at least every 10 years it needs to be updated, but you could do it more often if you'd like. Interested in Planning Commission's thoughts on that and our colleagues' thoughts. And then the report element. It's intended to show the city's progress on complete streets implementation. And we're trying to create a format for that report, interested what everyone thinks we should have in it. But the idea being to kind of show your work and then show how it's making us safer. So we could have more elements to that, and interested in what people have to say about that. So at this point, I think I've kind of laid it out. Leave it to the chair to think about how we take comments from our colleagues or from Planning Commission or the administration.
First, let me check in with my joint chair here. Mr. McDermott, any thoughts on next steps or direction?
Thank you very much, and thanks for having us here tonight. Open to Planning Commission's suggestions, but curious if we want to literally start from the top of the document and work down, and kind of that way we're not all going one by one giving comments on everything. If we could just
that makes sense in my process-driven brain. So yes. That's if council members, any opening remarks before we do that, or opening remarks from the administration? Okay.
Madam Chair.
Councilman Bullock.
Actually, could we talk about the whereas clauses and their significance and function? We don't have to go through all of them, but the reason they're in there and they're so extensive is?
I like to write. I don't know. So I'm a big believer in legislative history and showing your intent behind your policy. And actually I've gotten some feedback on how we can tweak those a little bit to show our intent more. But it's a show your work. Like, we didn't just come to this. We came to this based upon a lot of really thoughtful planning and a lot of efforts that have joined together to get us to this point.
I seem to remember there are some times and contexts when they kind of have a quasi-legal significance. Is that bear out here or no? You know, so for example, when you're going to do a project or a implementation underneath, you know, if this were to pass and become law, then you can draw upon the whereas clause principles. But you know, if I'm off base on that, never mind. Okay, thanks for the answer.
Okay. All right. So, other council colleagues, any opening? Okay. Then, yeah, let's just dig in at the top, shall we? So we're starting in definitions.
Or whereas clauses, do they have thoughts?
I feel like if we start with the whereas clauses, we're never going to get out of here. But if any, can we come back to those? Can we, or does anyone have strong feelings about?
I think we can be very fast on the whereas.
Okay.
clauses.
All right. Yes. Okay.
So just a few observations on the whereas. I do think it would be helpful and important if one of the whereas clauses does reference the community vision, just so that is tied in. Because if you look at the active transportation plan, it is, I think, part and parcel to the community vision. So if that ties in, I think that'd be helpful. There's also some references in the whereas clauses to citizens. And although we are serving the citizens and the legislation is truly for citizens, it's also for visitors, it's for guests, so it's really the general public. So I think citizens feels a little narrow. And then there was one point in these that just, I think, stuck out a little bit, especially in our current environment of property values, increasing property values. So in whereas clause number 6, it specifically talks about increased property values, and I think we need to look maybe a little bit more on that and just say protect property values, because with increased property values comes increased housing costs, comes increased taxes, things of that nature. So In second page, fourth whereas clause down, we're talking a lot about bicycle detection and wide travel lanes, which was a little interesting to read because typically we don't want to promote too wide of travel lanes. And when we talk about bicycle detection, those are really only at signalized intersections and not all intersections. So just a little bit of cleanup there. And then last point I have, and I want to open it up to the commissioners, we're using some terms like safe streets for all and Vision Zero commitment, and we just want to make sure that those terms, if they're not defined, are defined somewhere else, because we're utilizing them and kind of setting the basis for the ordinance, which is good, but some consistency may be helpful in the use of those terms. Planning commissioners, any other feedback on the whereas clauses? That's it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Council members, members of the administration, any concerns on whereas or feedback on whereas clauses at this point? All right, on to definitions.
Do you want to go, Chair?
Yes. Planning Commission members, just signal when to stop. But the first feedback is in number 3, complete streets. Part C, where we are saying roadway projects use sustainable and recycled materials. Understanding that that's a when possible, and understanding the role that Public Works is in and our city engineer, that's tough. Roadway projects are, unfortunately, in our industry, not all that sustainable, based on a lot of petroleum products that are used. Concrete is not a sustainable product when it comes to air quality and things that go into the carbon footprint there. So want to be careful not to put ourselves in a negative position right away saying that our roadway projects should use sustainable and recycled materials, because that could be a slippery slope. Not saying that it shouldn't be a goal, but it's tough to do. Okay.
Especially when
Want us to keep moving?
Yeah, I'll just, sorry, I'm processing that, but I also, in the same vein, point B above that is also, when possible, about prevalence of trees and vegetation across Lakewood, as well as best practice for stormwater management. And as we all know, sometimes those two things are in conflict. So both things, these are, so I think when possible is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, but it's also acknowledging, and the ordinance later talks about the importance of trees and sustainability. So those are just some of my thoughts too about calling out some of the grand vision, but making sure that when possible understands the realities.
Yes,
Madam Chair.
Councilman Bullock.
Thanks. I was going to head right for 3B as well, and simply suggest that we include roadway projects preserve and or add to the prevalence of trees and vegetation across Lakewood, et cetera. Because sometimes that alone would be a huge accomplishment. And I know this is an ongoing topic with many of our road projects in Lakewood, but when we lose trees and replace them, first of all, I want to acknowledge that the city has done a diligent job of replacing trees and adding trees, new sapling plantings in a lot of tree lawn locations, including on my street where there had not been trees for some time. So thank you for that. And at the same time, losing a 40-year-old tree or a 30-year-old tree and then replacing it with a sapling is not the same thing. Whenever possible, I really think it's critical and essential that we work with our city contractors to find ways to preserve every second or third tree that might be mature. And I think we were doing that a few years back. I'm less informed about how successful we are these days. be happy for a side conversation, but that's precisely kind of what I have in mind, is that we have a set of tree principles in a resolution that established the tree policies of the city of Lakewood. And I'd love to be more consistent in pursuing those goals. This may be another touch point. Thanks.
Sure, Director Gordon.
Thank you, Council President Keppel. Yes, within all of our construction projects currently, if we can preserve a tree, we certainly work to do that. The contractors are aware, utility companies are aware. Anybody that comes in Lakewood knows how much we value trees. But in a lot of situations, if a tree needs to be removed, we do everything to replace the tree. But I can't necessarily say it's in our best interest to say, well, every time we're going to add more trees, because there may be circumstances that warrant that not being able to be done.
I also think in the context here, we're also talking about, yeah, when possible, and also, again, and then also vegetation. So this also touches on things like plantings and planters. Like I was going down Lakewood Heights Boulevard today, and there's a big chunk of concrete and little, I don't know. Anyway, I was like, oh, that'd be so lovely if there were just planters there instead of flexi posts. But also be lovely if we had all the money in the world to do all the things. Director Gordon.
And to follow up with what Planning Commission Chair Mr. McDermott said, I agree. Well, we certainly agree with what he's saying, but maybe the better word would be to consider sustainable and recycling materials would be the word I would use. And as he said, when possible, I would agree with that. We certainly don't want to be held to having to do things that aren't necessarily the standard practice of today.
Yeah, you've got the bad mic. All right, should we move on?
Yes. Anything on 4 or 5? We'll also move to 6. Everybody good? Okay, 6, and this is this might be a pretty healthy discussion here. So it says transportation project means any project for which the city is the sponsor and is responsible for the scope of work. And reading this, I immediately got a little nervous, because if you look at some of the larger projects that have happened in our community on a roadway basis in the past few years, City of Lakewood is not the sponsor. You know, going back to all the work on Clifton that was done by RTA, that was FTA funded. Go back to recently Hilliard, it's a county project. And I understand it could be a double-edged sword, but I think those projects, and you look at what the county's doing for Lake Clifton, you'd want those projects to go through this process, to hold them to the same standard that we are holding ourselves to. So curious if there was thought as to why right now it says the city, and whether or not other entities, the typical entities being the county, RTA, ODOT, they don't do a lot of self-let projects, we're an LPA, but should the consideration be given that all projects go through this process?
Yeah, I would like to hear from the administration.
Yeah, I'm just not exactly sure that they would follow through with our process. If it was a ODOT-let project, if they would follow through our process. They have their own, you know, ODOT process that they go through that I'm not, once ODOT has, if it was an ODOT-let project, we're giving up that control. Unless it's LPA, that's where we have the control, such as, you know, the Bunce project and you know, Detroit Sloan. Those were LPA-led projects, and those we have authority and the control because we're the lead on those. Whereas, you know, let's just say 117th comes up, you know, you're looking at, you have Cleveland, you have the county, we're just a small portion of that. I'm not sure you know, we would be able to have any say in that to go through this process. That's why I think we've limited out of out of that process for those, because I think it'd be beyond our control.
Mr. Pappy, I agree from the point of there are certain programs that I think would be tough, but I think we should try. And especially when it comes to, eventually the RTA will do something again on Clifton. Hopefully other projects as well. So understanding that there might be circumstances when specific projects don't fit, but I think excluding them now completely removes the possibility that they go through the process. Just my thought.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Director Vargo, can you speak in terms of, there's a couple different factors with that. There's the sort of legality or the authority, and then there's the practicality of where the funding's coming from. So do you have knowledge of that in terms of oversight and our ability to control that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, without researching that specific issue, just we are assuming that we can control and dictate other governments in how they develop a street or design a street with primarily their own funds. Without the primary research, I think that lift is unimaginable. We can put in here that the city engineer will consider, and we have for Tier 2 projects, consider complete street elements. Even on Tier 2 projects, we can include projects outside of our control. We will consider it to the extent the county involves our city engineer in the development of the design, and complete street elements will always be discussed and considered. So it's not intended to exclude it, but it's intended to show appropriate humility that we can't dictate to the county how they design their streets. Thank you.
I'm sure.
Yes, although I did see Councilman Steiner, or was your question addressed?
I'm pretty sure it was addressed. That was just, I like that idea, but I think even with home rule, authority, I just don't, I think it's limited. If it's not our funds and it's not our jurisdiction, I think we're limited. But I do like the compromise that Director Vargo is speaking of, that including these types of projects in Tier 2 and saying that we would, if any of our personnel are being used or, anything like that, then we can include something where there has to be some sort of consideration.
Councilman Shubik?
Thank you. I'm not sure if I missed it in definitions, but LPA-led projects, and what other types of definitions were missing on that? Can someone explain that one to me?
So LPA means local public agency administered projects. So like when we get NOACA funds, we apply to ODOT that we will administer the project as a local public authority, which means that we're going to do the design, we're going to do the plans, we're going to administer the construction of it. And we have to have qualified personnel in order to do that. And ODOT has to approve that. On an ODOT-led project, it means ODOT's in control 100%.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Bullock, are you okay, or do you?
No, I wanted to weigh in. So I really appreciate Mr. McDermott's suggestion and agree with it strongly. I think as a legal matter, we don't have to sweat bullets on this. I mean, if it doesn't apply, then the county won't be bound by it. What this would do is simply state our intent. And by the way, it's just a definition. It's a definition that would attempt to include a broader Venn diagram of projects. So I think it's workable. I don't think it's going to entangle the city in any big problems. I think there's a way to craft language that would show that our transportation goals certainly ought to include those county-led road projects, which are some of the largest and most important ones in town, right? I mean, most of all of the collector streets and the through streets are going to have some county agency. We're only paying 100% for some of the residential north-south streets and a few others too. Isn't that accurate? So almost all of the important roads are going to be involved in joint planning and funding and design. And I also think that the county, maybe not the state, is trending in this positive, more thoughtful, more multidimensional design direction already. And maybe they've been dragging us along. So it's not so much of a conflict that we might worry about. So we're setting policy here. We're not creating litigation risk.
Thank you, Madam Chair, if I can respond to that. That's fine. I appreciate that that is policy, but that policy requires hours of work by our Public Works Department. So there will be a submission. Somehow the Public Works engineer is going to have to tell the county or state or whatever it may be to give the designs to the engineer at a time when the engineer can submit them to Planning Commission, allow the public process, go through it, take it, try to get that information back to the county if they want to listen. If they don't, it's a lot of work for something that is destined to maybe be followed and maybe not be followed at the sole discretion of the county or the other entity. It seems like a lot of work for our public works for no real value in the end. Thank you.
I just would say not no value, not no value, but
right.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mayor George.
If I could just add to, based on the discussion, what we know we can't force the hand of these other agencies, including this would be misleading, in my opinion. We know we can't force it. We're going to work with the other agencies, but to say that they will be, I think it's just misleading.
Vice President Baker.
Thank you. And I am interested in the research as to what authority we have. I mean, surely we have some authority over a county road in our city. I don't know exactly what it is. But I don't know that developing a legal argument on that is the point of this forum. I do think that we could create language that, says that on projects that are led by ODOT, and Engineer Papke, I can't think of a project off the top of my head that ODOT led in Lakewood recently. Has there been any?
Traffic signal on Madison.
Okay.
Traffic signal projects.
Okay. Yeah, and then probably the Detroit one as well, when they did it a couple. You might not.
Yeah, that was prior to me being here, but I think those traffic signal projects and the one on Clifton, I believe, as well.
Okay. I do think that there could be some language in this ordinance that talks about projects led by entities such as ODOT, the county, or RTA, and that a request will be made that they follow this process if it's called for in the active transportation plan. And so to the mayor's point, we're not setting up something that we might not be able to enforce, but it at least, to Councilman Bullock's point, at least outlines intent to make sure and I've found, at least in the projects that I've been involved with, that the county has led, Lake Clifton Bridge Connector, Hilliard, they did these things. Maybe not as formal as and exactly like the way this ordinance puts out, but I can remember being on Planning Commission and Hilliard coming before us and the Lake Clifton Bridge coming before us. So the county is doing some of this, so I'm wondering if there's a way in which we can capture that isn't as prescriptive, but perhaps descriptive.
Okay. Shall we plug ahead?
Yep.
I think just keeping in mind, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think we had docketed this meeting till 9. That doesn't mean we have to be out right at 9, but I also understand everyone's respect everyone's time. So into the earlier conversation too about how the emergency language not meaning that we're rushing this thing, that we may have some follow-up meetings with this as well. But let's keep going and we'll do what we can.
Great, thank you. Any comments on definition 7? Definition 8, there's a discussion point noted about CDBG.
Director Gordon or Engineer Pappy, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we included CDBG projects in Tier 2 just due to the fast pace of those projects. Generally, in August, I'm given the budget that we get for CDBG roads or water main funds that we have available. Those vary every year. It could be $300,000 one year, $500,000, $800,000, $1 million. It varies quite frequently. So in August, I'm given that budget. In September, we're preparing for the application and to present to the CAC committee for that project. And then usually around December, we're given the authorization whether, we're proceeding with whatever dollar amount that is. So that gives us to January through March to design that project, and in April to bid it. In May, we award it, and then by October, we have to have those funds spent completely. We're the largest spender of CDBG funds, and we keep, the city in compliance with spending those funds. There are times too that we'll be, in April, I'll do my bid openings and the administrator will come to me and say, hey, Mark, we have $200,000 more that I need to spend. Can you get another street done? That has happened several times since I've been here. That, hey, we need to spend this money, I need you to do another street. So, putting these streets into the Tier 1, just, it can't go through that process. We don't have the time, which is why we put it in the Tier 2. It's not saying that we're not going to take those active transportation plan elements and put it in there. Last year, we did Bramley and Lakewood Heights Boulevard, and we looked at the active transportation plan, worked with planning, and we put those elements in the design without, having to go through the process. So, we're doing it. We're committed to doing the active transportation plan, but we just don't have enough time to bake it through, 2-stage type submittals. So that's why we, opted to put those in the Tier 2.
So I think one of the reasons why it's bracketed and not finalized is because we did have some concern that by, not that there wouldn't be good faith efforts to put in the complete streets elements, but just because of the, what does it say if we do not have as much public dialogue in those census tracts as we would in other census tracts? So we had some concern about that, and also some hope that there could be some nuance there of, when it is emergency funding, or could there be plans in place in advance so that when it comes up that there is more money than expected, that we have those plans on the shelf and could be ready to go. So that's why, just for some context for everyone, that's why it's bracketed, because we didn't quite reach full consensus on that, or the best plan to move forward. I welcome council members' thoughts or planning commission members' thoughts. Councilman Bullock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So a lot of thoughtful points raised, and I appreciate the comments of the city engineer and of you, Madam Chair. And probably we're going to have to spend more time on this issue because we're going to keep working through tonight's punch list. I think it's important that we figure out a way that's workable and realistic given your time pressures, and those are real, and so those are valid points to raise. But nevertheless, to not have them, that, as you just shared, that's a significant portion of all the roads that get paved in Lakewood, maybe 20%, 25%, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's a non-trivial amount. So we can't be as successful as we intend if those projects are carved out. We also have to deal with the realities you're saying. So I don't have the solution right now today, although having plans in advance might be a good one. It's also I'd be curious offline or at the next meeting to understand or get my memory refreshed as to which streets typically get CDBG funding treatment. It may be possible to allocate that funding source to certain categories of streets where we don't anticipate as much need for this process. Or maybe I have that entirely backwards, and the method would be we're just going to have to do plans ahead of time. But as a step back, I think what we're really doing, and I mean this is for the residents too, is I think Lakewood, we're going through some growing pains, and the expectation and desire for all of us to have more and more successful public engagement, public input, including by council members, has been increasing. And at the same time, the city administration is under kind of standing marching orders to get work done on a timely basis, on budget, safely, compliant with the standards. That's also important. How do we have the best of both worlds? But I don't want to personally, at this stage, agree to have the solution be that we're going to back off on the public engagement and the quality and the rigor of planning, especially since these are kind of new policy goals, or they're new in terms of the consistency that we're proposing. So to me, we can't be successful if we don't somehow incorporate this funding category successfully.
Thank you. Councilman Steiner.
Thank you, President Keppel. So and again, I don't have the solution, but I do agree with Councilman Bullock that it's important that we don't just ignore the CDBG dollars. And I think that just what that says to President Keppel's point, I think is important. So I don't know if there's almost like an in-between tier or in-between process that sort of takes sort of the tier 1 intent and authenticity and sort of what that process would be like, and sort of speeds it up due to those time constraints that have been mentioned, and that everything has to sort of be done and implemented within a year. And so knowing that, if we knew the timeline as well of the CDBG and when everything has to be done, that might be helpful as well. So perhaps we carve out specific standards for CDBG, potentially, what we do and what that looks like. We can certainly discuss what that process would look like.
Dr. Gordon.
Thank you, President Keppel. I think to follow up what Mark said, there has to be a point here where there's a trust factor in that we're going to continue to implement the active transportation plan and to implement the complete street elements, understanding that this is a very, very tight time frame. CDBG street resurfacing is not the only project we have going on. We have 50-plus projects going on, totaling over $105 million, 13 private developments, and 6 private utility projects. So I just want to be clear, this isn't the only one on our radar. So when we're tied to this tight time frame, we have to move quickly. and understanding that we will, as we have done on many projects currently, we are implementing active transportation plan elements and complete street elements. But when you're tied into this time frame and individuals are coming to you and saying, you need to make a decision right now, or you need to make a decision in like the next 24 hours, or here's a little bit extra money, what are you doing with it? We need to know. We need to be able to move. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think this is one of those moments, too, to recognize, as we've been going through a number of meetings around active transportation, we're complete streets, and calls for action from the public, that we are right now in a moment where Lakewood is experiencing, as our culture is wanting to be the most walkable city, cycling city, multimodal transportation, ADA transition plan. We also have the sewer projects. We also have all these other projects, but also recognizing that a lot of this is, we are a walkable city and a car culture. And also that we have, this council has been very proactive in trying to get out and, talk with the public. I know the administration's tried to have public meetings and engage the public. But we also, are hearing about more desire for public engagement. And so that's part of what this is all about, this ordinance. And so there's a matter of having less that a lack of trust in any individual or persons or personalities, and more of codifying process that meets all of those goals and moves all of that forward, balances all of it. All right, other council colleague, Councilwoman Steiner. Let me go Councilwoman Steiner, and then I'll come to you, Director Byington.
Thank you, President Couple. Yeah, and again, it's not about not trusting, as President Couple said. It's about It's about our citizens wanting to be engaged and more connected to our government, which is a good thing, because what that does is that it cuts down on those emails that are getting sent back and forth. It cuts down on some of those phone calls because they've been involved, they know what's happening. And so they're like, oh yeah, I know about this because I was a part of the planning. I was at those meetings, I'm involved. So I feel it's always a good thing when our citizens want to be involved and they want to participate in our democracy. I believe in that fully. And so I think that's very important. And so why we're all here is how do we how do we do that best? How do we have that participatory democracy in government? And that's why we're here. And I think that's important.
Thank you. Director Byington.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to say, the planning department is responsible for implementing or administering the CDBG funds. We basically have one employee that's his main job, and he's very busy. And there is stress every year in regard to getting the funds out the door. There is requirements. You can't have more on hand. There's a certain percentage. You can't have carryover, or else you are, you're found not to be in compliance. So it's something that is stressful. And that being said, there is a public process aligned with the CDBG program every year. Now, there's 2 public hearings. There's a CAC, Citizens Advisory Committee, where they discuss the option of possibly doing a road, and they'll say what those roads are. Now, that's before the decision is made to use those roads or to move forward on those roads, and the process doesn't get down to the design of those streets, but there is a process, and the public is invited to that. And at those meetings, they could, if the public came, make comments in regard to, well, we'd like to see a bike lane, or we'd like to see bump outs here. It's not to the extent that you're recommending or we've been talking about, but I just wanted to be clear that there is a public process with CDBG, and there is a time crunch on it.
Thank you. I guess my follow-up would be if that happens in August with the streets that we anticipate using CDBG funds, not the ones where it's last minute of, oh, we've got this extra money and make it work, but the ones where we're submitting that to CAC and saying, please fund these streets. Couldn't that be also at the same time come through this process for the design? in the event that they are funded, so that the design would already be, the complete streets process could have already been followed, and then it would just be a matter of if the funding, because I don't know how often CAC has said no. Is that a common thing?
Well, through you, Madam Chairman, and I
Yeah.
can't speak to how many times they've said no, and I'm sure that Engineer Papke will have a couple comments here as well. But I think that at that stage, I mean, it's not approved. I understand the CAC usually approves things. They did veto one of the items. It wasn't a street, but they did veto one of the items that that was recommended for this year. But I just don't think they'd have the plans. We would be spending money before we knew that we were going to be approved to move forward with that street. So I think that we can have a discussion, and there could be a very high-level discussion during that meeting, but there would be, in my opinion, no way that we would have the design, the level of design that you're recommending to come to Planning Commission for the first submittal.
Councilman Bullock?
Thanks. This is a very actually healthy and helpful discussion. Not that it wouldn't be otherwise, but I've been curious about the getting deeper on the CDBG process for years. We also fund non-street infrastructure through CDBG. It's also an option to not have the last-minute emergency use of surprise funding capacity for a street only. We could use it for a park, a parking lot, something else, some other element. I know we've done that over the years, and so I think there's a solution. I take very seriously what you're saying about the timing and the compliance and the opportunity that those funds afford, so we want to get it correct. And I think there's probably some solutions we could explore so that there's, as the engineer was saying, usually there's a proposed punch list of streets. Often there might be one or two beyond the expected budget capacity, but every so often there is a surprise $200,000. But if we had a different project that wasn't a street, then we would have the best of both worlds. So not for right now, but maybe we could explore some alternatives so that we're not asking you to do the unrealistic. Thanks.
Councilman Evans?
Yeah, I think for historic's sake here, to make this a little bit easier to understand, too, I'd like to see how many streets that are currently identified as Tier 1 streets were also typically eligible for the cumulative block grant funding for repavement. So, what % of streets in Lakewood are we talking about? Is that many? And yeah, if we know what those few streets are that are high priority that also are eligible for that funding, what can we do to be more proactive with the design? Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, shall we carry on?
Great. So moving on to now section B. The first sentence in there says City of Lakewood departments will consider complete streets principles. Just curious, that feels a little light. Is it possible to say will consider and strive to implement? Because again, we can consider, but having a little bit more of an aspirational language, I think, would help set the tone. Other than that, in section B, planning commissioners, any other questions, comments? There's a lot there, but I personally don't have any. Okay, thank you.
All right.
I'm going to apologize.
Oh, go ahead.
I do have one more.
Sure.
Item 10, if we could add lighting. We had a lot of elements in there, talking about street crossings, pedestrian signals, signs, street furniture, et cetera. But I saw that lighting could, should, and maybe would be added. It's an important component.
Okay. Councilman Bullock, you're asking about public art and believe there's a reference. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think there's particularly when it comes to like painting, I think there's a reference somewhere about public art, but
I think there is later in the document, I'm pretty sure.
Madam Chair, while we're on that informal discussion, do the sponsors of this legislation envision that some of this could be accomplished in phases? So we're talking here about a plan, correct? Planning and the execution. Let's say that we adopt this, we have these new criteria, they're rigorous, shall consider and strive to implement all these potential features. Now, street such and such has got this multi-layered level of features. Are there some scenarios in which we would want, in year one, you get the foundations done, in year two, you come back with the treatments, or what's the typical best practice?
I think that's the interplay between the case advisory board and, so Complete Streets relates to capital projects. If you're coming back with treatments later, I think that's not intended to be captured within Complete Streets process, because unless it's like a major striping program for all of Detroit or something like that, you just wouldn't, like, that's more of a midterm, let's say Capitol Street lasts for 10 or 15 years. That's the stuff you do in between that major capital sink.
And the council president was, I think, alluding indirectly at least to landscape vegetation, what's the terminology, which is a great point. In some areas you're not going to have tree pits, but you might be able to do something else. Didn't think of that till you said that. But that would be something that could either be there in year one, or you could come back to it in year 2 or 3. So I just thought I'd ask. Thanks.
And I think too, the Complete Streets is infrastructure, major planning sort of thing. So and each intersection or street is going to have its own particularities. So as the engineer's designing, or going through the process with one, it might find, oh, okay, we'll put some concrete planters here that would block someone from running over this person. And, or there's also with the case, the thought of as something is in existence and it's not major infrastructure, but we're going to do some public art painting of the sidewalk. Director Gordon, you look like you want to add.
Thank you, President Keppel. So yes, to follow up what President Keppel said, once we're on a street and we consider all the Complete Street elements, our hopes would not to have to come back, sooner rather than later, obviously. So we would consider, as many Complete Street elements as we've already done on many of our projects. We would consider those at that time, and then the hopes would be once we're off that street, we're off that street.
All right.
Great.
Onward.
Section C, we've got discussion points in both the process, which I think the discussion point is really around the year in which this becomes effective. Planning commissioners, thoughts? Mr. Sanderson?
My main thought is that 1 and 2 are basically in conflict. I'm not sure what you're asking us to do in number 2, because if we have a robust discussion, and as we typically do, we don't micromanage the process. We make recommendations. Staff and engineering will come back and incorporate as many as they can. At that point, I'm not sure. I mean, it's great to review it, but what are you asking us to do? We don't like it, go back to the drawing board, or so it feels like they're in conflict. That's a big picture.
In terms of, so if we're starting with the year in which this ordinance really becomes in effect for projects, are we comfortable with 2026, 27, or as it's written, 27? Okay. And I think to your point, we'll talk about the stage submissions, the stage 1 and the stage 2.
Mr. Chair, my thoughts are not necessarily the year which they go into construction, but once it's implemented, which wherever each project is within its life cycle that can start adopting. So if something is going into planning right now, but I guess the year is not the magic number, but it's the process of where those projects are in their life cycle, I guess, is more critical in where my head is versus a defined year.
I can follow up to make sure that I understood that point correctly. Are we saying we're thinking more of transportation's projects that would be being designed or for transportation projects that would come before planning commission, or I'm not sure quite how to say this, but essentially it's less about when the construction would begin, but more about when the design process starts? Am I repeating back to you what you said, or no? You guys know these terms better than I do, so I'm just wanting to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying.
Correct. I think the thought is not when the shovel hits the ground, but when the project is kind of where we're at, when we're starting a project, that these get implemented. If we're starting planning or design work on a project, day one after this is implemented, then that project, then regardless of when it goes into construction.
Yeah, I think the intent, and I see what you're saying, because these have 2, 3, 4-year design windows at some points. I think the intent is to like start the clock on projects that go under construction in 2027, and then they'll kind of like naturally, whenever that design comes up, then but we needed to start a year where the projects are going to have to go through a process. But welcome any suggestions you have as to how to word that differently or describe it differently, but that was the intent.
All right. Further feedback? Oh, okay.
Well, and maybe if you look at the typical plan development process, maybe anything that today is already at a stage 1, ODOT stage 1 or beyond, then the motion's already set, let it go. Anything that is preliminary AER or before a stage 1, maybe that's the threshold. I mean, we just need a starting point. That's really it. Whatever makes sense.
Dr. Gordon or Engineer Papke, thoughts?
Yeah, I think, by putting in, 2027, our thoughts were that, basically anything that, would be for next year, we would already have to be to you guys by now in order to go through the process. So it's really, what we're planning in 2027 would hit in 2026 to go through the process. Is our intent. I mean, we're already putting complete street elements into 2025's water main design, for instance, already. I mean, those elements already are in there.
Great.
All right, onward.
So then on to the stage 1 and stage 2 submissions. Mr. Sanderson gave some, I think, cogent points on these. Any other feedback from commission? So having Bunce come to the Planning Commission, and I think when we saw that project, it was in concept stage, and it was helpful, but there was a lot of engineering yet to do. And personally, I think the way that it's set up actually does make a good amount of sense, that projects would come early, and then you could flesh out big picture, and then projects come again at that second stage. And to Mr. Sanderson's point, it's not our job to nitpick. If it's anything that's the most important, it's to give a venue for the public to give some feedback at that stage where maybe some minor changes, minor modifications could be made. But I think on its face, the 2 stages make sense. Mr. Sanderson?
I think it makes sense, except for the terminology of final plan, showing a final plan. If the plan is final, then what are we doing? So I think depending on the amount of comments in stage one, it may be stage one happens more than once in like a very complex plan. You know, Mr. Papke was very like, well, I don't know, let me go check and, you know, feedback, and then you come back on it. But I think once it's a final plan, it just feels like, okay, it's a final plan. Like, here it is. You're going to say no?
Yeah.
Don't do it. I don't see the practicality.
It's an excellent point, and maybe it's semantics where, you know, if we're seeing things at a concept stage or early, and then they're returning, you know, prior to finalizing construction documents, prior to finalizing bid documents, to your point, it's not final, because if it was final, it couldn't change. So at some point prior to the finalization of plans. And I mean, if you wanted to relate that to the ODOT plan development process, it'd be around a stage 3 plan set, prior to the PS&E plan set.
Councilman Evans?
I think the one nice thing about coming back as well is it's you know, it does allow the public to hear from the Planning Commission. It also allows them to hear from the administration on what could and could not be accomplished based on that specific project. So it's a time for opportunity to justify things that might have been left out for whatever reason, whether it's budget or practicality, or to talk about things that highlight the things they were able to do. So I do think it's a good venue to be able to all get together and come to at least see what the consensus was and get a peek behind the curtain on how the decisions were made and have everybody be understanding on that.
Director Gordon.
Thank you, President Keppel. So just to be clear to the Planning Commission, the city's proposal was for Director Papke, after he submits to stage 1, to the Planning Commission, we would accept public comment at that time, comments from the Planning Commission. Then after that, he would submit a communication to the Planning Commission, letting them know of changes that were performed after the stage 1 submittal, which would obviously still allow for any type of discussions, but to not have to come back again with another set of plans, to Mr. Sanderson's point.
Commissioner Reese, did you have a comment?
I guess I just wanted to, now that I've had a chance to think about it for a second, you know, so it seems like the intent is to bring the plan to the Planning Commission at kind of a conceptual phase, get that public input, but to bring it back in a final form as a presentation, I think makes sense. But I think if the public's going to be here and invited to hear those presentations, there's no opportunity for change. Those meetings can get contentious with no outcome that is possible to change it. So.
Yeah, we're familiar.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Steiner, and then. Oh.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think that makes sense. You know, it doesn't make sense to have a meeting, you know, have like sort of the first meeting happen and then get the feedback and go back and make those changes and then send the plan back and say, well, that's going to be the final one, and not have the public have that time to give that feedback. You know, I think if you've ever worked with designers, and, you know, they typically will give you no more than 3 iterations, you know, well, the nicer ones will. But usually it's about 2, you get about 2 iterations, 2 to 3, no more than 3 iterations. And I think that is a fair enough concept to go with in that thinking, that we won't have more than 3 iterations. I think it takes time for the public to, one, know about these things that are happening, and 2, to be able to get to these meetings to be able to give that feedback. But also, if you want the feedback to be meaningful, you want them to have that time to sit and parse and really think through these things, especially on bigger projects. I think that's really important for people to have that time to sit on it. So I think, you know, to say we're going to just go and make those changes and then send back a plan that's going to be final, I think is not really fair for the public. That's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and if I may, and where this came from, at least in talking to the Cleveland folks, is this is kind of akin to their process, where basically it's not just here's the final plan, it's here's all the elements that the public and Planning Commission requested be included in this plan, and we added them, check mark, or we couldn't because if we would have put a curb bump out here, it would have messed with the storm water runoff and would have created issues, and so we couldn't have done it. It was financially infeasible. And so it literally just gives, it gives the public knowledge of what the final plan is, but I think is important. One thing I always see and hear from people is we gave input, but we don't know what happened, and then we saw something being built. So I think that does provide value. And then the other point is that it shows the work of why, so the why, right? And I think the why is important for the public to understand as well. That was the intention in drafting it, but, you know, input is very helpful, so we can change it. But that was the intent behind the draft.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, as we're talking about that too, is some projects might be that they come to Planning Commission, there's feedback, limited feedback, not much feedback, there's not much public interest, and that comes back to you, everything looks good, nobody's here to talk about it, and on we go. And other projects might be a Bunce Road. So there may be a way to also have something where Planning Commission could recommend, you know, a second, I don't know, I'm trying to think through that so that it's not overly cumbersome on staff when it doesn't, you know, there's times when that would probably not need to be, where it's not, and other times where we might need to let a little more oxygen in. So I'm just thinking through.
From giving this body, the Planning Commission, the awareness, because, you know, one day we will all be gone and, you know, new volunteers will be sitting in our seats. I think some clarity is needed. So thinking through the process, in stage one, I think that this body should probably be able to recommend, not recommend, or receive and file. In stage two, I think that's where things get a little bit more dicey, because speed's going to be important. We can't have a lot of indecision and just an infinite do loop of, you know, go back and change this, don't do. So that's where I think that maybe in that in that stage two is, you know, just a receive and file, when a lot of the decisions at the concept stage, I think just like we've seen with Bunce, it's okay, the Planning Commission approved Bunce at a pretty early stage, and then it's really up to the engineers, you know, whether the consultants hired by the city or the engineering staff, to figure out how to do the absolute best job they can do. So giving too much deference at the second stage, I think, is a little sticky. So.
Councilman Bullock.
Thank you. A couple thoughts. First, good discussion, feedback. I think to Mr. Sanderson's point, the term final plan, we could work on coming up with a different term there. That would change the process. I do think you made an important point. You know, how do we balance oxygen for the public versus staff burden? I think we need to put the slider to 99.9% oxygen for the public. And if the staff is burdened and has timelines, we just have to plan differently so that we can get it done. Because nobody's asking the Public Works Department to do unrealistic things. But what we need to do is pace the work that we are doing such that we have the best of both worlds. And in terms of public notice, I'll say this council member often doesn't know the final decision on projects. I sometimes have to find out from the Board of Review, Board of Control minutes, the final design of certain things. And that's I don't think what any of us hope for. So there's a couple things. First, Architectural Board of Review, I know it's a different body, different job, but it's not totally unrelated. They'll see projects in a couple different rounds. They'll give high-level feedback, and then there'll be a follow-up where they get into the details, and then there'll be a final. I don't know if that is exactly the process we go for here, but I could easily see it being very constructive to have a preliminary and then a detail and then a notice of the final. So at least the Planning Commission, and through the Planning Commission, the public gets to see the final design. Because otherwise, a lot of times the citizens are filing public information requests, which also has a cost in terms of staff time and stress and strain. So let's just agree that we've got to have, we've got to level up our public input in every sense in our process. And that comes at a cost of time, but I think it's worth it. And I think we can get the balance correct. So I think it's important that the Planning Commission hears back from, sees some form of a project in a later stage, because I think Mr. McDermott's point is an excellent one. We're asked to make some decisions directionally very early in a process, but there's dozens of important decisions that get made, and then nobody hears back. I know that's not the intent, but some of these things are so important. That's why we're getting so much public engagement and scrutiny. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Mr. Sanderson.
If I may, so this sounds a little wonky, but the Planning Commission is meant to be a transactional committee. So perhaps if the desire is to have a public unveiling of a essentially completed project, that there's another format, and it's not necessarily the Planning Commission. As Chairman McDermott said, we take stuff, file it for information purposes, but generally things that come to us are meant to be acted on as both law and equity and as part of the process. I'm not adverse to it, I'm trying to understand how that lands on the Planning Commission, and my concern to Councilman Bullock's point is you have a lot of input and sometimes contentiousness, and yet there's no transaction there, there's no nothing. It's like, okay, well, do we stop? Do we let it go? That's not, without the authority to make that decision, I don't feel comfortable that the Planning Commission is the venue. Now, that's just one man's opinion.
I appreciate that. I think the question that I have and what I was trying to get at a little bit is the recommendation or the opinion of Planning Commission, and it may not be a unilateral opinion, is, so given that, is it better to have a second step where, or potential second step where there is a transaction possible, or is it better to only have one step with Planning Commission and then it gets filed with council, or that's kind of what I was trying to get at. Because I think to the point about oxygen and what we've been talking about this with opportunities for lived experience in the citizen engagement, and to Vice President Baker's point too of, okay, we took your feedback, and here's how, and here's why we could do this and we couldn't do that, and this and that and the other is good. But yeah, there's an outlet for that feedback too. So yeah, so let me go back and then go back to you.
Thinking about the role of Planning Commission and what it has become over the past few decades, to Mr. Sanderson's point, has been a bit more transactional. I mean, we do a lot of disposition, right? But if you look at the charter, what we are supposed to be doing is a heck of a lot more than that. At least that's the way the charter reads, understanding there's practice in this charter. So having the Planning Commission be the body to serve in that role, I think is, it's the right place, it's important, and I think we're down to the point of what is that stage 2? Is it a true recommendation, not recommendation file, or, so that's where I think that the stickiness is. And we don't want to hold up progress, we don't want to hold up schedules, and the fact that if at stage 1, if we're making a hard recommendation at stage 1, I think that's what's truly most important, because that's where you're setting the path for the project. I just want to be careful of the stickiness at stage 2. But I do think we're the right body for it when you look at the charter.
Yeah, just listening to this, it sounds like, and everybody's going to love this suggestion, but it sounds like there's a pre-step missing from this. Perhaps it is, we are rebuilding your street. This is what's involved with that. We're replacing the sewer. These are complete street elements that we're looking at. Can we get positive and meaningful feedback originally before the concept plan gets done? Then we have another chance for the public to comment on that concept plan. And then by the time you get to stage 2, you're at a final plan. So you have 2 meaningful rounds of public education or public engagement at that point. Before you actually do any designing, then once you've got a concept based on some of the feedback they gave you, and then you have what's become a final plan. It just seems like that's a better way to like start to get more and more quality engagement across the lifespan of the project.
Yes, and ultimately, and to Mr. Sanderson's point, there were many times at least, and I stay on top of the docket as much as I can in Planning Commission, but for example, when we did updates to the community vision or major plans, climate plans, it was come present, iterative, come back with final, and then receive and file. And to Mr. McDermott's point, if you look at the charter, now there's legality and then what's in the charter, right? But a plain reading of the charter says that, you know, if we're messing around with public rights of way, you're the body that should provide input on that. So to receive and file something that is the final plan to what you've provided input on, I think is an appropriate function. You know, or not. I mean, your input is well taken, but it could be receive and file, recommend or not recommend, right? You can say, I don't like this, and I don't think that you took into account enough of what we provided you, and so I can't recommend it. You could do that, I suppose. Just like technically on a community vision update or a master plan of a park, you could do that as well. It's pretty extraordinary, but I think you have that power.
All right. Yeah. Oh, yep.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Madam
Director
Chair,
Varga.
I know the hour is late. It is and this is to Councilman Baker's point and to the excellent points raised by the commission members. There is a legal answer to the role of the Planning Commission with respect to street design. And the Law Department was asked to look at this, and we looked at it. And I can go into detail at the next meeting or otherwise, but it is not broad. It is limited. The Court of Appeals in 1990 for Cuyahoga County looked at our charter language and said that the engineer, the administration, cannot be mandated to refer items to the Planning Commission unless it involves the entire street being eliminated, or an entire street being added, or an entire street being narrowed or widened, or the use of the entire street changed, such as changing it from a car to a bike, for the entire street. So if a portion of the street is being narrowed, the engineer cannot be mandated to refer that to the Planning Commission for report and recommendation. And I think what we're hearing from the commission members is an instinctive to that holding by the appellate court. So it's imperative that the administration agree to this process because it's the opinion of the law department that the engineer cannot be compelled to refer this. Now, that includes the first referral, and so it certainly would include a second and third referral. But as long as the administration voluntarily does it, that's the administration's prerogative, and it has often sought the input of Planning Commission where it's not required because they work well together and the process yields a better result. But in terms of legal authority, that's a legal question, and the requirement that the administration, the engineer, refer specific items to the Planning Commission is narrow, not broad, with all due respect, Councilman. Thank you.
I've just, if I can respond briefly, I think there is a case, and you did send it, and I haven't reviewed it recently, but I do think that there is a little bit of a gap between does the charter require referral to Planning Commission, and whether or not the codified ordinances could require the engineer to submit something to Planning Commission. I think those are different questions, but we can have a legal discussion off of the record. But I do think that there's birth between those 2 points, what the charter requires and what council can require with codified ordinances.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, is there's a difference between referral for design input or who has design authority. There's no question the engineer has design authority, but, you know, council can refer anything we want to Planning Commission. So the question of anything being referred for input and for public input, I think, is different than design process.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to be specific that we not conflate issues. Council can refer anything at once to the Planning Commission. Council can expand the role of the Planning Commission, but it's the opinion of the Law Department that council cannot compel a separate branch of government to refer items to the Planning Commission. Council can do so all at once. The administration can do so all at once on its own volition if the Planning Commission is willing to take it. But one body of government cannot compel the other to mandatorily refer it. That's limited in the charter. The people put the charter together and limited that. Thank you.
That's the first time I've heard this legal opinion. You analyzed the case, but you didn't go that far in your analysis to us, but we can talk about that.
Madam Chair, briefly.
Councilman Bullock.
Thanks. Firstly, I know it's late. However, this is a really important discussion. I appreciate it. And spending the time on this important topic is worthwhile. So thank you. Second, the goal here is not to get into a tension or a conflict between branches of government, but rather to try to develop new habits, methods, procedures to support all of us in achieving stronger outcomes. And part of what we're talking about is how do we measure those stronger outcomes. So I guess I'm looking at this as a build it up rather than a kind of some other analogy of either we're playing a tug of war or breaking something down. So I would invite us to think of these as tools for management and project development that are our friends. And it's important that we do put the careful thought to them, and we're beginning that. Thanks.
And I'll just add too, is we wouldn't have spent an entire year trying to work with the administration if we didn't have respect for the city engineer and planning department and public works department. That it was out of that respect that we tried to work together. So hearing this, you know, surprise opinion in this manner is disconcerting a little bit out of respect for that shared work process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd appreciate the opportunity to respond to that. I did email the case to council leadership several months ago, and I thought I corrected an express comment by council that the responsibility of the Planning Commission in this regard was broad, to be broadly interpreted, and I clarified that this case makes it not broad. It's narrowly interpreted as to what the administration can be compelled to refer. And there's a lot of policy reasons for that charter provision. No need to get into it now, but just want the record to be straight. Thank you, Madam President.
Sure. I just think that's a little different too, is that the charter also says that boards and commissions can compel testimony. So that's a little different than having input on design, but they do certainly have testimony. What we're talking about here is specifically creating a methodology for public input and engagement, not about having micromanaging design process that requires a certain level of expertise. Okay. The report. Okay. Should we, if everyone's okay, I'd like to just finish this part out, and we can, we'll come back to the case advisory board at another meeting. Does that suit?
Yes, but could we go over item E?
Yes.
Before we go to the report?
Yep.
Okay, I even think there was some public comment regarding the threshold or time frame in which the active transportation plan is updated. I'm not sure what the commissioners feel about this. 10 years, a decade, a lot changes in a decade, especially with the pace at which that we've seen personal mobility devices and vehicles change, both smaller and mammoth when it comes to certain pickups. But what do we think about doing 5 years? And I want to be careful when we say the plan will be updated. Certainly don't want to put the city in the position to have to spend a bunch of money every 5 years to completely redo a plan. So maybe it's updated, refreshed, revisited, something simple. But 10 years is too long.
Go ahead, Councilman.
It's okay. So I was actually okay with 10 years, only because we do our charter review every 10 years. The census is every 10 years. It's a triggering number, but I do understand that, yes, I agree, however, that a lot can change in 10 years. So I'm also okay with 5 years or even having an either or, right? So if in 5 years a lot hasn't changed, we haven't seen a lot, there hasn't been a lot of issues, we push it out to 10. But if it seems that there are certain conditions triggering this, that a review needs to be done in 5 years, we do it in 5 years. So that's sort of, I'm okay with 10 years just because, it makes sense to do it every 10 years, but 5 is fine with me as well.
Madam Chair?
Councilman Bullock?
I lean towards more frequently now. Part of me is reading this in context with the next ordinance on the docket, which we're not talking about right now, and I don't know if we're going to stay to do that tonight. Which would, I believe, provide a method by which to do updates or consider projects at a more frequent pace. So I certainly would like to have updates, refreshes, amendments quicker than once a decade, whether that's here or read together with the next one. I could defer to others on how we accomplish that. But if this is the only, for example, if we were to pass this and not the other proposed ordinance, and this were the only updated, I'm speaking poorly, requirement to update the active transportation plan, then I would incline towards being more quick than 10 years.
Colleagues? Councilman Evans?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It should be 5 years. We're moving and evolving and changing at too quick a pace to be able to just sit back and say every 10 years, let's take a fresh look at this. It's not appropriate. It's inappropriate for what we're trying to do here, I would say, for that time frame.
Okay. We had some conversation about that as we worked with the administration, and the language was a little broad just in that sort of intentionally to be updated at least every 10 years, that it could be more, and also that could be, there was concern about the cost of whether that meant doing an entire new active transportation or refreshed. So that could be something also to consider of that maybe finding the language in there that there could be a review or something at 5 years without having to necessarily do the entire process. Midterm review, refresh, something like that too. Because as we know, development could change these things as well.
Moving on to the annual report. Got a few comments, but certainly any planning commission members have anything specific? So looking at this, I think 1, 2, and 3 make a lot of sense. Number 4, the number of citywide trees planted feels a little broad for the report that's related to complete streets. So maybe if it's trees planted as a result of complete streets projects, if that data is kept, it certainly it makes a little bit more sense to what we're looking at. And then wanted to suggest that 2 items be added. And one is perhaps like a 5-year outlook. So we talked about updating the active transportation plan every 5 years, but so that there are no surprises, or at least try to limit the surprises. Obviously, opportunities will be presented, but in the annual report, if it's possible, look forward 5 years. You know, what are the priorities to fund from the active transportation plan that you think you want to pursue? Just so it kind of sets the stage. And then the other suggestion that has come up in the meeting that dawned on me is perhaps in the annual review is the opportunity to report on the streets that have been funded with the CDBG funds and what elements of the complete streets were worked into them. So that could be in the annual review, or depending on the month in the calendar when the annual review is presented to Planning Commission, maybe that's an update on the CDBG funded projects that are being sought. So that one tweak and those two additions. Planning Commission members, anything else? Mr. LaPointe.
Mr. Chair, when I look at some of these metrics, I feel that they're a little lost and they need to be grounded to, like, what are we assessing, or what accountability what are we holding ourselves to? And I know we tie back to the updates to the active transportation plan, but kind of on an annual basis, are we making progress? Are we not making progress? Do we not know until every 5 years? Like, what are these additional lenses at which we're reviewing our projects? How are they benefiting the community? And I feel that just reporting some basic data, we're not really understanding whether we're having a meaningful impact. And can you present the data in a way which really helps tie, are we making improvements? Are there things we're missing? It just seems a little lost to me when I look at it. I'm not saying I have the right answer.
No, and I think what we were mindful of when we work with the administration on, the first draft last year had crash data, speed data, those fatalities, serious injury crashes, those kinds of things. And the challenge is that we were told we don't have a ton of that data, or so if we mandated that it be in some report and we don't have it, then that's a challenge. So that's why we tried to broaden that, so that if methods to obtain that data become easier and easier to digest, that we could then put it in there, because that's the point, right? I agree, is to show how we're accomplishing safer rights of way. So would welcome thoughts on how to, that's the challenge, right?
Mr. Reese.
I really do like the idea of the rolling 5-year outlook. I think if we're able to include that in here, we can start to, over time, see the projects that are coming online and kind of look at those 5-year projections and being like, maybe for public input purposes, we can kind of say this street's going to be like this street, or it has similar characteristics. So when you get to that early public comment period, you already can start to say, these are the streets that have been built this way. Here's what we're thinking 2 years, 3 years down the road. I think that's a good suggestion.
Thank you.
Comments? Nope.
I got one short one. Thank you. Have we captured traffic calming projects somewhere in one of those categories? I think we probably should, right? Maybe it's type of crosswalks and intersection improvements, and some traffic calming projects are not at the intersection. And I'm quickly skimming. I don't know if public art is included anywhere here. It might be in the next proposed ordinance. And if I haven't missed something, or if I'm reading that correctly, then arguably could we include that somewhere on the previous page in section B when it lists all the 1 through 10? And I defer to the bill sponsors or the legislative sponsors here. If there's a way to include public art on the list of many things that might be considered, great. Be nice, in my opinion. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy to support that. And I also think In terms of the report, it would be specific to public art, relevant to the purposes of Complete Street rather than, yep, yeah. Director Gordon.
I guess this is more of a question on my behalf. Thank you, Council President Keppel, for the Planning Commission and for Council Chair Mr. McDermott. Is with the 5-year plan that you're asking for, you know, certain water main streets could pop up within that 5 years that become more of a need than others, or potentially a street resurfacing project. A street pops up more of a need than others. So I think if we are going to put that in there, it needs to be worded correctly, that potential changes can be made, because, you know, on behalf of myself and the Public Works Department, you know, we don't want to be set to, okay, you know, here's the 5-year outlook, we're doing these streets, and then one come up that needs immediate attention, and it's said, well, you know, that's not in the 5-year forecast. So I think proper wording there needs to be considered as well, and the ability to make changes on the fly when needed. You know, there's many factors to consider: public comment, you know, city council, hearing from others on certain street conditions. Obviously, you know, we use the PCR, but those can change. And again, I just want to make sure we're not held to the fire on that.
If I could, I think our intent is certainly not to have anything that is binding. It is, you know, if there are certain projects that are maybe even aspirational, you know, at some point, Detroit is, I mean, it was, what, 2012 when it was last done? So, you know, at some point, some of these larger projects, you're going to have to really put together funding applications and capital stacks and everything you got to do for these big projects. And I think it gives an opportunity to say, hey, we'd love in 4 years if we're coming back and talking to you about X project. So that's really it. It's just to have an idea.
Yeah, I think that's good, and also to the point about, like, with the CDBG projects is, you know, if we know that's in the forecast, but it's just dependent on funding, that's another way to take that into consideration of, these are on my short list that we've got to do sometime in the next 5 years, and that process can begin with some community engagement without holding up the process later on. Okay. Well, made it through this one. Like I said, I do want to be respectful of people's time. We do have the case advisory board as well. Mr. McDermott, what are you thinking? Are you comfortable with us scheduling a second joint meeting, or would you rather keep going?
I think we'd be thrilled to come back.
Okay. I don't know if the game's still on or not, but.
They're winning 104-57.
Oh, well, good. So what we're saying is that we need to have a joint meeting every time that they're on. Is that what we're saying? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think the Heat players had some Cancun trips booked tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, that's one thing we could all agree on, right? All right. So, okay. Well, I'll just want to thank everyone for their time tonight and thoughtful dialogue. I think this conversation is going to make this ordinance stronger, and we'll keep working on it. And we'll schedule for the case and maybe work on amending some of this and coming back to it. All right. Any final comments from council members or the administration?
I've got one more, which is good job, and I mean it. I thought it was very thoughtful, and getting all three plus the public, so that's all four. The fourth estate is here as well. You know, these are worth our time and effort, and I think we're having these conversations because we're trying to increase what we're doing in Lakewood, and that's appropriate. Thank you.
Yep. All right. All right. Well, without, oh, go ahead.
Do you need a motion from us?
I think when we've done joint meetings before, we don't necessarily need a motion for us, but why don't we do it just since we have two bodies? So Director Varga, do you have thoughts about this process-wise?
No, I'm not familiar with the process of the commission. Ms. Swallow knows it inside and out.
I think typically for committee, I'll just say that we're adjourned and you can say that you're adjourned.
Perfect.
Okay, so without objection, Committee of the Whole is adjourned.
Okay. Without objection, Planning Commission is adjourned. Thank you.